Everyone out there in the world. As you can see, I'm still sort of getting ready. It's okay. I know you all like watching a little bit of my getting ready process, so I'm just braiding my hair so that I can wrap it around my head and then pop on my coif here. But actually, I left the coif off on purpose. Anyway, if you all are there, let me know, and if you can hear me, even more importantly. Oh, Stargazer, did you go away? Oh, I hope you're still there. So I'm just braiding my hair and waiting for someone to pop into the stream so they can confirm that sound is on. Unfortunately, my cats have decided that now is the moment of playing, so there might be a lot of rustling. I don't know what I'm going to do about that. I can't lock the cats in the bedroom because little Nobby has taken to peeing on the bed for whatever reason. I don't know if it's because her mother abandoned her when she was too young or what. She knows how to use the litter box, and she does. Oh, good morning, and welcome to my live stream. I'm just braiding my hair in preparation to put on my coif, but I've left the coif off on purpose. Oh, goodness. Okay. I can tell there will be some editing. If you are there in the live stream, just let me know in the chat if you can hear me or not. That will be a very important part of this conversation. Okay, so hair is braided. Hair is about to get wrapped around my head. And then I'll put on my coif, and then we can start with the sewing and the chatting. If you are there, whoever just joined, if you could just let me know if you can hear me or not, if the sound is good, if the picture is good, and all that sort of stuff. I'm just finishing some final details. Welcome, welcome, everyone. Okay. Mm. Good morning. I'm just finishing putting on my coif, and then I'm going to get started with today's sewing project, my new Burgundian veil, or kerchief, as they seem to be more properly called in 15th century English. Couvre-chef in the French. So I've been looking at these various sorts of veilings that go on top of the various sorts of turrets and mitres and horns that women were wearing in this era. And I've come to some interesting conclusions that are going to lead to the my latest kerchief to put on top of my various headdresses. And I'm going to be making a new one because I should show you all what happened to the one that unfortunately I packed very poorly on the return trip. Yeah, it didn't survive. And it shouldn't have survived considering what I did to it. So yeah, that's just the way. That's what happens when you travel with medieval kit. Good evening, Susan. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Are we all audible this morning? Okay, so welcome to my Creative Contessa Medieval Sew Along. The format is I will be sewing and holding forth and talking about my various explorations into medieval living history. And if you have questions about anything I'm doing, just pop it in the live chat. Fantastic. If you all can hear rustling noise, my kitties are experiencing their morning wind, which means they're going crazy. So they have a box that they have nested into basically that has become their play area, and they chew on it, they play in it. Nobby brings her toys into it, so they're they're having a good old time right now. Okay, so what is everyone working on today? I am working on my new Krupa Chef. So this very, very fine fabric, which you can see me, is actually a silk organza. And I am actually upcycling, recycling, reusing a pair of silk organza curtains that I bought on eBay for almost nothing, a ridiculously little bit of money, actually. So that's a trick for you. If you're looking for unique and exotic fabrics, you can often find them in the form of high-end curtains, and you can find high-end curtains on extreme discount on eBay by looking up whatever the fabric it is you want and curtain. Making sure you check on the material type to make sure you're getting in the search linen or silk or whatever it is you're looking for. And then scroll through your results, and I can guarantee you're going to find these amazingly high quality uh 100% silk or linen or whatever it is you're looking for curtains for nothing, because they have what are called floor models at interior decor stores, and then when the season is over they dispose of them, and they dispose of them usually by passing them on, selling them to resellers who then sell them on eBay. So that is where I found this amazingly transparent, yet has a good body, oops, sorry, yet still has a good body, silk organza. And I got, I think this set came with 4 curtains, and they were 3.5 yards each, 60 inches wide each. And I paid $30 for them. So that's, 12 yards of silk organza, 60-inch wide for $30. You literally can't buy that anywhere these days. So yeah, that's my trick on purchasing fabric for reenactment that will not break the bank. Okay, so what am I actually doing with this amazing silk organza? So I've been experimenting with this exact same silk organza for a while, and I've done different things with it. And I finally decided I'm going to use this to make my new couvre-chef, my new kerchief, which is a veil headdress kind of thing that will go over top of my turrets, what you all might incorrectly call them, pennon. They weren't called that in the Middle Ages. So the first thing I'm actually going to do, this is kind of the boring part, is I cut these in half. They were 60 inches wide, as I said, and that's definitely not a medieval width for silk organza or veiling fabric in general. So I'm just going to have to now hem this entire thing. And I want to get it hemmed first because, as you can see, it's long threads are coming loose. And so I'm going to get it hemmed first. And then what I'm going to end up doing is actually cutting off a rectangle that will be something like this, actually. The way I'm going to make this couvre-chef out of my silk organza is going to be very, very similar to the construction of this. Take it off and show you. So my theory is that these are all kind of a piece of this, sort of like pieces of the same idea. So it's got a rectangle here, and then the kerchief, the part that covers your hair, is actually attached to the back. And basically, instead of it being small like this, that just sort of goes around my head, I'm going to attach the entire length of veil here and all the way down to here, actually. And then it will go all the way around my miter. And then you'll have this nice frame part here that will frame my face in this fine, fine, sexy silk organza. And then the rest is just going to drape down regally over the miter. So I've been studying lots of imagery and that have taken me to the conclusion of this style of headdress existing. Expect a vlog on the topic with all those details, of course. But in the meanwhile, step one is to hem this long exposed edge that I have here, because I'm using a modern fabric woven 60 inches wide, not a medieval fabric, which would have been woven at 30 inches at most. So yeah, it had to be cut in half. But that's how a lot of those medieval veiling systems worked on that you see in all those portraits, because the fabric is naturally the width it kind of needs to be for those veils. More like the veils were developed because that's how wide the fabric was. This is awesome that people keep living these historic pieces of clothing. Oh, yeah, thank you, Norton. Yeah, or keeping them alive. I've always been drawn to this period of history. And so, thread. I've always cosplayed the olden days, shall we say, from my earliest memories. So yeah, this is I realized at some point that I was particularly drawn to the Gothic era, what the people in the 16th century called the Gothic era, snobbily, um, which is basically the 15th century is kind of my preferred time in that frame. But I am interested in pretty much most periods of history. Really, Kitty? My kitties are in an ornery mood. Okay. I seem to have lost a lot of my needles over this last 20,000 miles worth of air travel, but that's okay. I'll go with this needle. So, yeah, I'm not seeing other chats. Disregard previous chat. Oh, okay. So, what is everyone working on this evening? Is anyone else working on a project? Am I the only one? Are you all just going to watch me be hopefully productive? So I'm not actually going to pin this hem in place before I sew it. Someone's going to yell at me for putting this needle in my mouth, and they should. They should. You shouldn't put pins and needles in your mouth because if you sneeze, if you cough, you can just as easily aspirate them, and then it's a very nasty trip to the ER. Granted, I'm currently in Korea where healthcare is affordable, even out of pocket, but it's not something I really want to have to go through just because I was storing a pin or a needle in my mouth. Yeah. So I'm not going to be using pins to actually pin the hem in. I am actually just going to stitch the hem straight in using a technique I'm going to show you that may or may not have existed in the Middle Ages. We actually don't know. We know what kind of stitches they ended up creating, but we can only kind of guess how they created them. We assume it's the same way we create those same stitches, but sometimes there's more than one way to sew a cat, as it were, 'cause I can't contemplate skinning a cat. So I'm using silk thread here. This is actually Korean silk embroidery thread. So it's super fine, as you can see. And of course, for those who might not know, you always wax your thread when you're hand sewing. Remember, when you are hand sewing something, that thread is going to get pulled up and down and up and down and up and down multiple times through the fabric and it will wear out, which doesn't happen with a sewing machine. The thread goes through your fabric exactly once. Hence, we wax. Okay. Actually, I've added on. So you see that lighter chunk of wax against the oxidized older wax? That lighter chunk was the melt off from a beeswax candle that ended up on one of my Peruvian towels, and I just picked it off and added it to my wax cube instead of melting it into paper towels and then throwing it away because beeswax is a precious commodity. So yeah, if you're enjoying, don't forget to hit that thumbs up. I hate that I have to say that. I really do. It's not something I certainly want to have to say all the time. Right. Okay. So the reason I want to go ahead and get this hem out of the way is that even the pieces that I cut off that are going to end up framing my face, probably exactly this piece here, even that is going to have to get hemmed in some way. And it's easier to not be dealing with all these annoying silk pieces everywhere. As is, I did something I didn't want to do, which is I washed it before I hemmed it because it was so filthy after this last event. It really was. Not its fault. My clothes live a hard life, and there was a lot of dust at the very last event I attended. We were literally in a arena. It's deep sand horse arena, dancing, and the dust that it kicked up was prodigious, biblically bad. And that ended up all over my face, and then the part of the veil that was around my face, of course, combined with my sweat and the oils from my skin, and that wiped off onto this, and it made a really unappealing ring around the not the collar. I don't know what that would be called. Ring around the forehead? Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to do then is I've anchored my thread. What you always want to do first, anchor your thread when you're hand sewing. When you machine sew, you do like a back stitch, right? That's how you anchor the thread. You back up and then go forward. Okay, well, that's what I do when I use a machine. I don't know what you all might do. But what that means is that you have to anchor your thread in a different way when you're not doing it by machine. And you could back stitch over your stitches, but I prefer to do an anchor stitch like this. That gets everything solidly in place, and then we can go from there. So basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just work along the edge here doing an overcast stitch, a whip stitch, and it's going to kind of force this to just fold in on itself naturally like this, and we'll end up with a hopefully really narrow kind of rolled hem, at the other end. So we'll see how it goes. Yeah, hi Salem. Thank you for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, please do, as I said, pop them in the chat. So, yeah, I've actually had a really crazy 3 weeks behind me, attending multiple medieval events to lead dance and be the Contessa, and traveling from pillar to post. I went from Seoul to Zurich, Zurich to Washington, Washington to Delaware, Delaware to Baltimore, Baltimore to Oklahoma City, where I went to Turner Falls. And then from there, I went back to Delaware via Philadelphia, then back to Philadelphia to head down to Mobile, Alabama, then to drive up to Selma, go to Montgomery, fly to St. Louis, from St. Louis to Chicago by train, and then Chicago finally back to Seoul. That all in 3 weeks. Yes, just 3 weeks. So it was, yeah, it's generally how my business trips end up going, because I try to squeeze as much into a visit to the US as I possibly can. But really, I, I envy people who fly to one place, unpack the bags, stay there for 2 weeks, pack, and then come home. Like, I don't even know I can't imagine what that must be like. Oh, this looks a little funny. Let me finish putting on my kerchief. Let's see. Your hand sewing is mostly out of frame, so it is hard to see what you're doing. Oh, thank you, Cheryl, for letting me know. Let me adjust. Do you make bank? No, I definitely do not make bank. I barely cover the cost of travel, honestly, if at all. I've not started making bank from this medieval Contessa gig. Hopefully, I can eventually turn it into that, but right now it is not making bank at all. For those of you who don't know, I am a professional translator by trade and editor, and the machines have basically eaten my job. So yeah, I my profession, the profession into which I invested some 30 years of my life, has been taken over by the machines, and there is no more money to be made in translation, at least not in the languages, not in my language pairs, sadly. And editing has also been taken over by machines these days. Grammarly, all of those apps, yeah. So I'm trying to see if the other skills into which I've invested tens of thousands of hours of my life can somehow be my next career. Also, I'm hoping that, the machines sort of hand work like this, teaching it, sharing it, um, doing it will be one of the last things to be taken over by the machines, especially on something as really rarefied or really esoteric as, uh, medieval stitchery. We'll see. So you'll notice, when you hand sew, you kind of have to create tension. A machine would normally do that for you, right? It's got the tension foot and all that. You've got a hand that's usually kind of pulling against the machine, so it maintains a tension. Well, you have to create all that tension yourself. And so, uh, this is what I call the hand frame technique, and that's completely a me term. So you can see how I've got, sort of the fabric stretched between two sets of fingers, basically my thumb and my pinky, and then my index finger and my middle finger. And my ring finger is kind of, it can be there as a place against which I can press so that I can get that needle through the fabric. Now, on the medieval veils, you don't need to do this because they're woven to the right width. So this is a step that they would not have had to contemplate at all. And that's why you can get sort of those crazy fine edges that you see if you start looking at, especially the Flemish masters who were well, masters of depicting drapery and fabric. When you start looking at those veils, you'll notice that there's no seams, no hems. No, there might be seams, no hems. There are no hems, and you've just got all these really translucent fine edges everywhere. That's what happens when your fabrics are naturally woven in 15 to 30 inches wide. And there was really a broader range of widths being woven in the 15th century than there are now. More purpose-made items too. You know, fabrics were woven if the fabric was intended to be for veiling, then you can see in the sources that it was woven to one kind of width, whereas if it was intended to be made into clothing, then it was woven into a wider width because wider was certainly preferable. Even medieval people didn't necessarily want to waste lots of time and effort on unnecessary labor. There's always a balance between the cost of materials and maximizing economy of fabric versus, labor. Achilles is here! Yay! Marco, so lovely to see you. For those who don't know, Marco was my Achilles in one of my performances of a sword dance I choreographed to depict the final battle versus in the Myrmidons versus the Amazons in the Iliad. So glad you could join us this morning, Marco. Evening, whatever time it is where you are. Susan says, "How long did the train take, and was it comfy?" Ah, the train. The train from St. Louis to Chicago. Little bit of an adventure. Should have been 4.5 hours, turned into 5.5, because of course Union Pacific owns the tracks in the dystopia that is the U.S. Because why would we have rail that isn't privately owned? And so every time a cargo train passed, we had to pull over. We had to sidetrack, literally, and let the cargo train pass us and then continue on our way. So there was a lot more stopping and starting than there should have been. And that is why Amtrak is always, always, always late and always will be late um, until they deprivatize the rails, at least rails for public transit. But, better living through big business and oligarchy. You choreographed a sword fight? So rad. Yeah. I mean a sword dance. So I mean it's not as violent as a straight up sword fight, but yeah, I did. It's a pretty cool dance. I think there's a recording of it. I know there's a recording of it on this channel. If you look up sword dance, you'll probably find there might even be different recordings from different years because there was a bunch of years where every year I was doing it at the same event Penzic, and so I'd have a different crew each year. If we're lucky, the one with Marco is there because he was hands down my best ever Achilles. But if you're not lucky, then it's one of the other Achilles who, in some cases, wasn't even necessarily a willing participant and just got dragooned because I didn't have enough people to do it otherwise. Which is great, when friends are willing to do that for you, that's fantastic. But it might not lead to the most convincing performance, shall we say? Yeah. So I've actually been had some very interesting discoveries in the last couple of weeks. I found a pair of 15th century Irish pattens. Those are the wooden overshoes that you wear that medieval people wore over top of their leather turn shoes to protect them. And I hadn't found evidence of those existing in Ireland. Lots of evidence of people going barefoot for no good reason other than it was mucky, which always made me wonder, well, if it's mucky, why don't they just wear pattens like everyone else in Europe was doing? Well, they were in Dublin. And the pair that I found in the archaeological museum, they are super platform, like really platform. So yeah, it's that was a very exciting, interesting find, and they're very interesting because they've got like they're like leather clogs basically, where the wood with the wooden bottom and the leather top that actually covers the whole foot. So more like pianelle actually than patents in that regard. Now, what I don't know, and I don't think anyone knows for certain, is whether these ones were worn by men or women. I haven't found documentary evidence, but I'm going to be including those anyway in my segment on 15th century women's Irish fashion, which will hopefully be coming out in the next month. I'm still working on the segments on which are going to be two pieces for certain on men's fashion within the Pale, late medieval Irish men's fashion in the Pale, and then I'll go on to the women's. I've been so thorough in researching these videos that I want to make sure I'm getting all the information out there. So it takes longer. The essay that is the script alone is like 10 pages long of densely typed script. So yeah, you can imagine how long that becomes when you start narrating it and then adding visuals and all that sort of stuff. Let me see. Um, was Amtrak cheaper than air because Amtrak customer service stinks? Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. The train was a third the cost of traveling by air. It was like $348 one way to fly from St. Louis to Chicago versus $111 business on Amtrak. And actually, their customer service on board was fantastic. The conductor loaded my heavy ass bags of medieval crap for me and unloaded them for me and was super polite and super kind. So I was very happy with the trip. And they kept making announcements reminding people not to dump their crap in seats because the train was sold out and that everyone should have a seat and that no one should have to ask someone else to move their stuff just in order to sit in a seat for which they paid. So yeah, I was very happy with my Amtrak experience. I've never had a problem with Amtrak. I've had big problems with Greyhound. Never, never take Greyhound. Oh my God, I have never put that video together. I had a nightmare experience with Greyhound where the bus was 11 hours late departing and it smelled like something had died. And I don't mean plant life had died inside of this bus and there was trash everywhere. Oh, it was horrible. And there wasn't even people in it. It was an empty bus. I was like the only person left still waiting around for the bus at that point. Yeah. So Greyhound, don't recommend. Amtrak, never had a problem. Granted, I've never had to get customer service on the line when it comes to booking my tickets, so I can't really speak for that. For those just joining, I am hemming the edge of the silk organza veil that is known as a kerchief in 15th century English sources, a couvre-chef in French. And this is the first step towards making my new Burgundian style couvre-chef. Franco-Burgundian, I guess, is probably more accurate. And this is the first one. I've never seen anyone else make one like this, so I'm very excited to maybe be a sartorial pioneer in 15th century reconstructions. Now, just because I've never seen anyone else do it doesn't mean no one has. But I'm just going to go with the if I haven't seen it, it doesn't exist theory of existential belief. Oh yeah. So is anyone else working on anything themselves, or are we just watching me while I hold forth? Let's see. While you answer that question, I've found some more fascinating, interesting resources that of which I was unaware before. Specifically, 15th century expense accounts belonging to Roi René d'Anjou, the King René of Anjou, whom some of you may know from his very famous Book of the Tournament. And I was unaware that his expense accounts had survived. As some of you have heard me harp on before, the French Revolution was terrible for the study of 15th century material culture because lots of the archives that had all of those expense accounts went up in smoke. The revolutionaries set them on fire like the assholes they were. Um, don't get me wrong, I have a certain sympathy for revolutionaries these days, especially, but also when you set the libraries on fire, my sympathy dies. So, anyway, I wasn't certain, soapbox off. I wasn't certain whether I didn't know that any of King René's expense accounts, he was the Duke of Anjou. I didn't know that any of his expense accounts had survived, and some of them have, at least, and maybe more. I've only found, well, thank God for 18th and early 19th century antiquarians. They really, real boon to modern reenactment because they transcribed hundreds upon hundreds of pages, thousands of pages of medieval manuscripts like this so that it would be much more accessible for those of us who maybe don't have a mastery of paleography. And they published them. And they certainly were not doing it for the money. There was no big bucks in translating 15th century expense accounts, but they did, and they often compiled them into groups. So, you have the expense accounts of the kings of France, or you have the expense accounts of the peers of France. So you can actually, look at multiple sets of expense accounts in one tome. And so I found King Rene's expense accounts, and reading through them was real interesting because Renee, and also the expense accounts of the kings of France, which mostly covers the late 13th to early 15th century, but still real interesting. For instance, in I'm doing a putting together a video on May Day celebrations in the Middle Ages. More go beyond Beltane. That's what I'm going to call it. Beyond Beltane, May Day celebrations in the Middle Ages, because everyone focuses on Beltane because there's this fascination with pagan rituals, but everywhere else in Europe also celebrated May 1st in different ways and more courtly ways, which is more interesting to me anyway than just setting crap on fire. So, yeah, I'm going to be doing a video on that that will be due to be released on May Day. I hope. Here's hoping. So part of my research for that is the clothing, because May Day rituals on the continent were very heavily bound up in clothing. And so I was looking at the expense accounts for Charles the Sixth, seventh, sorry, mm, might be Charles the Sixth and the Seventh actually. Um, and they've have lavish expenditures for May Day livery for their household, so that their household can all dress in green and be super duper fancy for the May Day, fancy and yet somehow rustic at the same time for these May Day celebrations. And what was interesting is there was a whole multiple orders for hoopalons, where the order single expense item included the hoopalon plus matching chaperones that were made out of the same fabric as the hoopalon. And that was a revelation to me, because you talk about making matching pieces, but here is actual documentary evidence that it was common to make hoopalons with matching chaperones out of exactly the same fabric, and that they were all included in the same order, and they were to be made by the same person in this case, or well, the sit workshop of the same person, because it was not just one person making 12 hoopalons in 3 days. Yeah, that's the kind of turnaround they were expecting too. It was hysterical. There's like the order was like April 27th, and you're like May 1st, 28th, 29th, 30th, 31st. So yeah, they also expected these impressively insane turnarounds, apparently. Yeah, let me see. Um, oh, I guess projects we're working on. Faux M Faux M armor. I'm not certain how to pronounce that. I'm not certain in which language I should be pronouncing it, but getting ready to sew up the body gussets of a fancy cotton tunic for the summer. Muslin is cheap, don't judge me. No judgment, my friend. This live is going to be fantastic noise and fun facts. Well, thank you. I hope so. Um, yeah, cotton is an interesting subject um, in a medieval context, because there is a false belief that cotton was not used in the Middle Ages, which is absolutely not true. Cotton industry in the Middle Ages, and the cotton trade in medieval Europe was immense, and lots of money behind it. But what is true is there's not a lot of cotton fabric that is used. That is true. Like actual proper, just fully pure cotton. Now, what is common is a blend of cotton and linen, referred to often in this certain kind of weave called fustian, and that was used often for arming garments, because it breathes well and is more durable, because apparently cotton is pretty durable, and it adds durability to the linen part of that equation. So, and they used cotton batting heavily to pad everything. I mean, and I do mean everything. So, yeah, muslin, okay, probably, yeah, yeah, I mean, not necessarily the most authentic choice, but on the other hand, I believe that authenticity is a spectrum, and that everyone should be able to enjoy their medieval living history journey without breaking their bank. And that loses me subscribers, that attitude often. The purists don't appreciate me saying that, because they believe that unless you can afford to apparently have everything be museum replica quality, you shouldn't even bother you shouldn't even be allowed to look at a reenactment, let alone participate in one. And I just don't believe that. I believe there's always room for improvement to make your kit more authentic, which means there is no absolute authenticity. And that I want everyone to enjoy this and explore history hands on, which is going to mean, not everyone is going to be able to afford hand woven, hand hand grown heirloom flax, hand beaten, hand broken, hand spun, hand woven, hand dyed linen, for instance. And that's okay. But on the subject of, muslin is cheap, I do recommend for people who enjoy thrifting, Goodwill and thrift stores of all kinds, but especially Goodwill because they're a big name. Goodwill often ends up with brand new in packaging linen curtains because a lot of the department stores actually have them. And the interior decor houses do too. And when they don't sell, when they have just one or two left, they donate them to places like, or well, one or two relative to the number they would need for it to not look sad on the shelf, right? They donate them to stores like Goodwill because then they get a tax write-off. So I've some of the best quality linen I've ever gotten was from a pair of white linen, brand new, unused curtains from Goodwill in Covington, Washington. The second best quality linen I've ever gotten was from IKEA, from their crap. I never remember the English name for the part of IKEA where they sell the store display models that are a little bit battered. Second Chance, maybe called Second Chance, something like that. Right. So at IKEA, there's this thing near the checkout area called Second Chance Fundgrube in German. I did all my shopping at German IKEA. But this one was actually in an IKEA in Renton, Washington. And they had a set of queen size white linen duvet set with pillowcases. A queen size duvet is immense and it was all woven as one piece of fabric. So no seams except on the edges. And the quality of this linen, real pretty. In fact, this is, wait, what am I saying? This is that linen. This is a pillowcase. Its first life was as a pillowcase. Um, And honestly, the linen is such high quality that I've actually kind of decided I'm just going to use them as actual bed sheets because it feels so nice on the skin. My point is I paid like $40 for what is probably 10, 12 yards of linen. Really high quality linen. So you can, if you have the time and the spoons for thrifting, these are some suggestions if you really want to get out there and get into things like, linen, but linen on a budget. Those are kind of some of my tips. Also, again, eBay, linen curtains end up on eBay super cheap all the time, new in package often. And it's nearly always cheaper than buying it off the bolt. And because the quality of linen curtains, of fabrics for interior decor is going to sound bad, but here it is, generally higher than fabric intended for the clothing industry. How sad is that? So yeah, eBay, if you look up curtains and you can actually choose the material, it'll actually let you choose linen or linen cotton or silk or whatever it is you're looking for. I've really, those are, yep, some of my best fabric finds, best quality, best price. Goodwill, curtain section, IKEA, Second Chance, and eBay looking for curtains of all kinds. Yep. Let's see. I've missed some things. Didn't Rene d'Anjou have an illuminated prayer book? Oh, Rene d'Anjou had a lot of. He was a bibliophile, right? He was another of these patrons of the arts. So yes, Rene d'Anjou definitely had an illuminated prayer book. His book of the tournament is probably the most commonly known of his illuminated tomes because many copies were made. And supposedly it's his book. Supposedly he authored it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, maybe he's just a patron, but it's a pretty awesome book. And the illustrations in his book of the tournament in all the editions are lovely. Let's see. Hi. Oh, Magnolia. Hello. I'm from Toronto. I'm finishing up a final essay that's due in 2.5 hours. Oh, is this helping you, Magnolia? Is this actually helping you finish that essay or is this distracting you from finishing that essay? Let's see. I'm more of an SCA guy anyway. Authenticity is second to just having fun making. Yeah, absolutely. Also, it's faux as in fake. Great. I make foam armor and props. So foam, pronounced foam. Oh, foam. That's cool. I'm a linguist, so I find that kind of stuff fun. Awesome. I love it. Fantastic. For those who don't know, I am a countess in the SCA and a laurel. Um, I just do a wider range of I do SCA and I do not SCA, so I kind of do it all. Um, and authenticity is completely a spectrum. You make your choices, and I I don't judge other people. I don't need to. Okay. If people deserve to be judged, as in they're mean people, I will judge them. But then it's about, making sure that mean people get put in their place. Uh, it's a justice warrior in me. Oh. So, yeah, back to some of my recent finds in those expense accounts. Um, the matching chaperone and hoopalon, that was pretty interesting. The use of language for there was actually some mention of using, oh, back to cotton, of using cotton, actually, and not just cotton batting, I think actually cotton fabric, in fact, to line garments, cotton and linen together, to as sort of linings for garments. Specifically, I think it was a hoopalande. Actually, it might have been a gown also. The dividing line between a hoopalande and a gown, there's it's not always clear, and sometimes I think it depends on the inventoryist whether they decide that the thing is a houppelande or it's a gown. As the 15th century wears on, the term houppelande vanishes increasingly in favor of the term robe in French, because houppelande is a French word, not an English word at all. It doesn't houppelande only appears in English sources if they're just outright parroting French, basically. But I actually found the latest reference to a houppel and houppelande in the French inventories that I've ever seen. In fact, when I tripping through Renee's expense accounts was an order for an houppelande to be made for a woman, actually. For I think maybe I didn't look up who she was, but I get kind of feeling she might have been his daughter, Mademoiselle de Lorraine, which means the lady of Lorraine, and I think she might have been his daughter. I did not get a chance to look that up, and I meant to. There's a bunch of things in there that are intended for her, and it's a little weird for the Duke to be giving a bunch of different garments to an unmarried lady, with who's very clearly titled. I guess she could have been his mistress too. Though usually they prefer to take married women as mistresses for reasons that should be very obvious to everyone. Um, so I'm not certain whether, you know, who this lady was, but she was unmarried. She was obviously a titled lady, and there were lots of different garments that were in his expense accounts for her. And in Opinond, as it was written, not Upinond, but Opinond was one of them. So that was interesting because that entry dated to 1478, which I've never seen a reference in primary sources to an opulent that late. So that was very interesting. I know these weird geeky things, right? What do you do in your free time, Contessa? I read dusty people's receipts. I read dusty dead people's receipts. That's what I do for fun. And to think that people studying our era will not have those kinds of resources because we throw away the receipts. We don't store them in archives. Let's see. I'm personally okay with trying to be authentic, but using reasonable modern substitutes due to availability or budget. Yep, absolutely. I'm 100% about allowing people on budgets to enjoy this delightful, magical game. Again, that will lose me subscribers. In fact, I have a whole series on my channel called Medieval on the Cheap, and basically, or medievalish on the cheap, something like that. And it's all about how you can find equivalents, through thrifting, of medieval items so that you can have a kit that looks pretty reasonable and certainly will pass the 10-foot rule and get out there and have a good medieval time. So in that series, I provide the originals and then I show you like the modern equivalent I found in a thrift store or wherever, and tell you how much it cost and, to give you some ideas on what you can be looking for when you're out there thrifting. Yeah, because unlike one reenactor, a snobby British reenactor, when I released that series, I got real flack from the living history community for it. And one snobby British reenactor who then got banned from that group actually literally said, if you're too poor to do it properly, you should just go to your backyard and grill instead. Which the level of privilege, some of you have heard this. This guy really pissed me off. Some of you have heard me say this before, but I'll say it again for those who haven't heard it. The level of privilege that that guy was evincing in that statement. So many things wrong with that statement. First off, that poor people have backyards. Wow. Two, that grilling is cheap because meat is cheap. And that he gets to gatekeep what other people, which people can participate in medieval living history or not, is all of it is just wrong, 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 wrong. So don't forget when you're hand sewing, left turn, when you're hand sewing, don't forget to occasionally put a little securing knot along your stitching so that if any of these stitches eventually give way, right? And they will, my things anyway, the stitches will eventually give way and they'll wear out. And then you don't lose the whole line of stitching. You just have to repair a short patch of it, right? But anyway, here's what's happening so far with that seam. You can see the organza is so nice to sew. It has a great hand and it folds really easily and it doesn't slither and shift around. So yeah, it's really easy to do this with. I'm not certain if I would have the patience to do this with like a habotai or a charmeuse or something like that. But yeah. Let's see. Oh, yeah, Yolande, Duchesse de Lorraine, younger sister of Queen Marguerite d'Anjou. Probably, yeah, that might, I don't know. She should have been married by 1478, I think. Maybe though, could be. Susan. Good series. I'm sad those beautiful table linens are no longer available. Oh yeah, Takeda. Yeah, thank you for having watched it. But yeah, it is really sad. I think they went away during COVID and they just never picked up that supply chain again. They do still have the towels, I think. But not the tablecloth. But maybe they don't have the maybe do they not even have the table linens anymore? That would be sad. But there are other people selling them. I have found other people selling both the Perusian replica Perusian tablecloth, the woven version, not just the printed version, and the towels. Unfortunately, the the new source, well, I mean, let's be honest, the old source I'm pretty certain was made in India, so maybe a little maybe a little bit of a moral conflict there on making that purchase. The new ones that I found, the new source that I found for the Perusian tablecloth was like $500 for the tablecloth, which honestly is more in line with what it probably should cost because I think it was woven in Lithuania and not India, something like that. Right? Yeah. So it is sad that that really inexpensive version is no longer available. Yeah. Let me see. I am cutting down Harbor Freight tarps and sewing them with blue. Ooh, nice. Harbor Freight tarps. That's a good idea. Tarps, not tarts. Please don't cut down any tarts. Harbor Freight tarps. That is a great idea. Um, are they the like the painter's drop claws? Those kind of tarps? I don't know why my mouth wants to make the word tart instead of tarp. Yeah, those are for those who have medieval pavilions. Those are great, inexpensive ground cloths. Those painter's drop cloths that you can get yeah, Harbor Freight or any of those, home improvement stores, right? You can actually get 100% cotton drop cloths, painter's drop cloths, and sometimes really heavy duty ones. Like I have one that's so waterproof. We got it in a German at Obi in Germany, and it is so dense. The canvas on this one is so dense that we had a flood at an event once, and literally there was a river running under our pavilion, under the tarp. The tarp was so watertight, all natural cotton, no treatment, just tightly woven. naturally waterproof. It was so waterproof that you could walk across the tarp, but it had kind of become a waterbed, and it was like walking on a waterbed, but no water came up through it at all. It was amazing. So you can really get some very inexpensive, you and drop cloth material, and because otherwise, if you buy a commercial pavilion and then pay for a drop cloth, the drop cloth can sometimes be $500 to $1,000 more in addition to the cost of the pavilion. But you can also just go and get one of these drop cloths for like $90 and cut it into the shape you need. And then it's not treated with anything weird like plasticizers or unnecessary chemicals, because here's the hot tip, everyone: cotton canvas is naturally waterproof. All you have to do is get it wet once, and the fibers swell and they never unswell, and it will stay waterproof until the fabric starts deteriorating. And it will take a while for that to happen if it's any kind of quality. Let's see. Yes, they're off-white cotton drop cloths. I wait till they have one of their monthly sales. Oh, I didn't know they had monthly sales. Oh, that's good to know. So Harbor Freight is, I think it's a nationwide US chain. Um, so yeah, they have monthly sales is a hot tip. The flooding sounds like a Pennsic. Yeah, this was a crown tourney. The flooding was at a crown tourney in Germany, and in the shadow of Borg Coburg, actually Schloss Coburg, where the Duke and Duchess of Coburg technically still live. Um, yeah, it was epic. It was it was a really, I mean, yeah, that memory is burnt into my neural retina, so to say, forever. I can it's flash crystal clear like watching a TV. I had never seen anything like it, being able to walk across the cotton canvas drop cloth, and it just floop, 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 floop. The strangest sensation, and be perfectly dry on the other side, on our side of it, while a waterbed mattress worth of water, flooded through on the bottom side. Da-da-da. Yeah, that had to be very epic. It was it was epic. Oh, and oh my god, yeah, and then, uh, we got we had to pack it down wet. It was still raining. So, back then I was living in Germany, sort of near Darmstadt, between Frankfurt and Darmstadt, to the east, actually, of both of them. And we had a two-story apartment that had a living room that was open to the ceiling, and then there was a galley, really, like a musician's galley, and there was a beam in the ceiling, and so we literally hoisted the pavilion up into it because we didn't have a yard. We were living in an apartment house. We hoisted it up to the ceiling, and we have tile, thankfully. And the water that sheeted off of this pavilion, it was buckets full of it. Thankfully, tile floors, no harm, no foul, and we were able to dry our pavilion in that manner. But it was so heavy with water. Oh my god. It wasn't soaking wet because, like I said, the canvas is waterproof, but the amount of water that it had trapped in its folds. Whew, yeah, that was amazing. And then we took and then we stupidly took a walk because we thought the rain was done. The rain wasn't done. The skies opened and God poured forth his wrath horizontally. And so we had rain blowing in our faces like this, and we had to lean our bodies like this to walk against it and get back. And by the time we got back to the apartment, every part of our body was numb. Fingers didn't operate, and the only dry part on all of us, all three of us who took a walk, was the little heart shape of our butt cheeks was somehow dry. I don't know how, but everything else on every other article of clothing everywhere else was sopping wet. And it was so cold that, and I needed to use the bathroom so badly, but my fingers wouldn't work. Maybe this is TMI, but there it is. My fingers wouldn't work because they were so cold. And so I had to ask the neighbor because none of us could, all of our fingers were frozen. This was a cold driving rain in the middle of April. It wasn't expected. So we had to ask the neighbor to help me with my zipper and button. It was so, yeah, thankfully, Germany, no one is really, verklempt about that kind of stuff, and I'm not either, Just, it's like, how often is this situation ever going to happen? Oh my God. Crazy times. That was one hell of a weekend. I haven't thought about that crazy weekend in a while. Ah, the excitement of medieval living history. Yeah, I've encamped in some crazy, crazy weather. Penzik especially. And I am going back to Penzik. For those who did not know, I am returning to Penzik this year. I have decided, despite all the crap that's happening and all the people who are definitely not going, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to attend and I'm going to try to bring as much beauty into the world as I possibly can in the process. So, yeah. Yep. Well, this is actually going along really smoothly. It's just this, I'll tell you, these long seams, they sometimes get so boring. These long straight seams. I really do enjoy a good round seam, good round hem, rather. This is not a seam. Good round hem. Yeah. Oh, ooh, my fingernails are not looking the cleanest. I should have washed my hands more thoroughly. So, everyone, dear fellow sewist, dear viewer, dear participants in today's sew along, if you're going to do what I'm doing, which is sew with white silk thread on white fabric, you should probably wash your hands really thoroughly because if you look, you can see that is gunk under my fingernails from doing nothing today. Actually, I don't know why they're so dirty, and that is unfortunately on the tips of your finger on your fingertips also, and that will combine with the oils in your hands, and then you're going to make your thread gray, this nasty shade of gray, and you're going to get nasty gray, smudgy stuff, brown, smudgy stuff all over your nice white fabric. So don't do it. I do it. I say, wash your hands thoroughly before commencing sewing. And that's why a lot of embroiderers will actually wear gloves. Professional embroiderers will often wear gloves if they're doing, especially when they're doing high-end clothing, because they don't want to get the oils from their fingers onto those precious materials. Because the oils from your fingers will oxidize and they will turn things a darker color, an unpleasantly darker color. Yeah. So let's see how it's looking. It's looking pretty nice. I do so very much love the hand that Silk Organza has for the full size screen. There we go. Not to take anything from, I have given up on Pennsic now for years. For me, it's simply too much. I try to do other camping events to make up for it. Yeah, I can understand how Pennsic could be too much. Yeah, I think there are ways, I think it's a question of what one does at Pennsic also. For me, for dance especially, Pennsic is the mecca of Renaissance, medieval and Renaissance dance. It is literally, we get critical mass to do even the most complicated, crazy 15th century performance dance where I'm almost never going to get the level of skill and the number of people I'll need to do that at a smaller size event. So you can really, you can, if you can leverage the numbers, well, there's more things you can do at Penzic than you can do anywhere else. But also, yeah, I could absolutely see how it would be overwhelming, especially if anyone has any kind of social anxiety issues or, of course, unfortunately, these days, Penzic is becoming a real issue for pot smoke because, of course, now that it's legal-ish in Pennsylvania, everyone thinks that means they should just be able to light up a doobie wherever the hell they want and perfume the place with the smell of a dying skunk. I think we know where I stand on the smell of pot. I don't care what people do, honestly, as long as it doesn't affect me. And to me, marijuana smoke literally makes me want to vomit. It's such a terrible smell. And unfortunately, Penzic is getting really inundated with it. And people will scream, "Oh, I'm in my camp. I can do what I want in my camp." Okay, then please go in your unbreathable Coleman and zip it up and don't let any of that nastiness out because the smoke doesn't just stay in your camp, it floats everywhere. So that might actually be the thing that eventually makes me stop going to Penzic because I can't breathe. Rant off. Let me see. How do you turn the corner on this seam? Oh, well, when we eventually get there, I will show you, but so normally I would miter the corner. Let me see. So, Cheryl's very good question is how do you turn the corner on this seam? So here is the corner, right? And so normally I would actually miter the corner. So we'll see if I actually get there. You get up here, and I have a video. I have a video on mitering corners. I know I do because I did it specifically for the making of this thing, and I'm pretty certain I published it. I think if you look up mitering corners, um, or mitering, seam mitering, or something like that, I think you'll be able to find it. But anyway, right. So mitering the corner means that you basically make a little triangle here. You fold one side over like that, right? And then you fold down a corner like that. It's kind of hard to demonstrate on this, right? And then you fold that down, and that creates that diagonal look that you see if you look at how like napkins and whatnot are neatly finished. So that's called mitering a corner. So we'll see if we get there before my phone dies, because as you all remember, we tend to go so long that the devices die before we do. By the way, if you're just joining, please do hit that thumbs up. Thank you all very much for watching. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments. Yeah, did that make sense, Cheryl? Um, the very haphazard demonstration of what mitering a corner is. Now on this, I don't necessarily have to miter it. I could just kind of because I don't. I'll think about that when I get there. But normally on corners like this, I would miter the corner. Yeah. Yeah. So some people might ask why I'm not just rolling this hem. Rolled hems sometimes create ruffles, shall we say. And I don't want ruffles. There's no evidence of ruffles on these veils. The edges are very, very straight. So this nice flat seam, creates a very straight edge. See? No ruffling, which is what we want. Okay, I did not wax this. I will not make that mistake. For those of you who don't know, wax, of course, gets stiff when it's cold, but you can just heat it in your hands, a little bit of breath, a little bit of hand heat, and then it will get soft. Of course, older wax takes a little more effort to make it softer. It does harden with time. That doesn't make it bad. And you can actually moisten wax too. You put it in a moist a bag with some moisture and just maybe put it in the sun. It will actually re-moisten, as it were. Um, Let me see. I miss classes and some activities, Takeda says. Yeah. It is Takeda, right? I am pronouncing that correctly. Takeda. Yeah. Takeda. Yeah. Penzic, for those who don't know, is amazing for the classes. It is probably, and I know there's a lot of living history snobs out there who will probably poo-poo me for saying this, but let me be honest. The top level living history research in the world is generally always being conducted in the SCA at the top levels of the SCA. And places like Penzic are where that research gets taught and passed on. So you can go to Penzic and learn about some of the most incredible esoteric topics taught at PhD level, really, but more practical maybe than PhD dissertation defenses might be. And and all just part of your cost of attending, right? You don't pay extra for those classes. So the kind of knowledge that is being shared at Penzic is absolutely without parallel. Sans pareil. Absolutely. So, and I've actually noticed a lot of living history groups out there, medieval living history groups, they're using the SCA's research papers for their stuff. They're using my research for their stuff. I can tell because, I can see exactly things I've said being repeated by them like verbatim, or dances I've taught exactly as I've taught them and only I have taught them being replicated verbatim. So, yeah, you can poo poo the SCA all you want, but one of its strengths is the low bar that allows anyone to get into the game. And the other strength is that there's no limit that people are encouraged to explore to the limits of energy and skill level, and therefore do that and then share that knowledge freely. So yeah, Penzic is a place where you can go and take advantage of that open source learning about, you know, you can take classes on Middle English, you can take classes on uh, 16th century tailoring techniques, on 15th century dance, on ancient Egyptian games, all merely many of which I'd say probably 60% of maybe 70% of which are based on primary source research and not just passing on something that someone has heard from someone else. Yeah. Oh, heavens. Foam says, heavens, I'm in California in a weed heavy area. Yeah, it's terrible. When I was in Harlem, New York City about 2 years ago now, I can't believe it's been that long. It was walking. I put on my COVID my N95 mask because I could not stand the smell. The stench was horrific. And I have Korean friends now who won't go back to New York because of the stench of pot. Literally, that's why. No other reason. Not well, okay, there's other reasons now. But before the reasons that now exist, they've stopped going because of the stench of pot everywhere. It's like I understand. I guess, maybe we need a public smoking ban. What you do in the privacy of your car and your home is on you and is great, but if it starts to affect me, it's not cool anymore. And if it affects me in public spaces, that's really not cool anymore. I hear you. I'm allergic to tobacco, nicotine, and sulfur, among other stuff. I can't take the pot smell. Yeah, nicotine. Ugh, nope. Also not. I mean, even when I was a little girl, I grew up in the '80s, so everyone still smoked in the '80s. My parents quit when I was very little, but a lot of my friends' parents still smoked, and I remember literally taking my turtleneck and pulling it up over my face at the age of like 4 to protect myself against the smell. So, yeah, I guess it would just be nice if smokers of any substance would have courtesy for those who don't wish to partake for good reasons, because it's not healthy. It really isn't. Our bodies weren't meant to inhale anything that is burnt at all, no matter what it is. I mean, the effects might be nice and lovely and all that, but that doesn't make it good for you overall. But also, the smell of all of that stuff makes me queasy. And of course, I absolutely loathe it when smokers just dump their cigarette butts all over the place like there's some kind of boon to the environment. They're not. They're disgusting, non biodegradable fiberglass garbage. Don't just throw your cigarette butts on the ground, please. So, yeah, let's see. What other, back on a more pleasant topic, soapbox off. What other exciting explorations have I had this week? I actually started to jot it down. My research into the the May Day celebrations has been really interesting, um, because in different places it took different shapes. But there seems to, no matter what, there's this common thread of we go get some plants and we put them on our head. We go get some plants and we decorate our space with them. The plants change based on location, so it's very, very locally based. But it's all about bringing in the greens and celebrating the return of spring and the return of life. And the further south you go in Europe, the more that gets tied in with ancient Roman traditions that have kind of stuck around. And of course, the further north you go, the more it gets seems to be tied in some cases with Celtic traditions, but not always. There's a lot of ancient Britain traditions that maybe survived, so not just Celtic. And some things that were actually adopted by the Celts that were actually originally Briton, shall we say. But what's something a lot of people need to realize is that in England in particular, the Puritan the time during Cromwell, all of those celebrations were banned. So when once by the time Cromwell was off the throne and the English were starting to reconstruct, we want to go back to the idyllic days of May Day celebrations. No one really remembered how it used to be done, so they started making stuff up, which means that most May Day celebrations are not, an authentic representation of medieval tradition. but are of a reconstructed from a poorly remembered memory version of things. In some cases, just entirely invented, not even based on memory. So that's why I always say tradition doesn't mean medieval. Tradition just means it's been happening for a couple of years in a row, and then it becomes traditional. I think there's already a smoking ban. Definitely a lot of areas that are prohibited from smoking. I also remember when they used to smoke in restaurants, and I'm glad they don't allow that now. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I remember also smoking in restaurants. What a miserable experience. I actually went to a restaurant in Oklahoma City, a truly dive diner, and unfortunately not one of the good ones. The food was inedible. We walked away hungry. They actually had a smoking room and the door was open. I haven't smelled smoke. Okay, that's not true. Japan, they still allow smoking in restaurants. So the last time I smelled smoke in a restaurant was 2018 when I was in Japan. Um, Not that wasn't the last time I was in Japan. That's just the last time I was in a restaurant in Japan with smoke. But still, in America, I haven't smelt smoke inside a restaurant while eating since I was a little girl. And that was alarming. But apparently, this place is such a dive that they're pretty certain no one is going to report them for breaking the smoking regulations in the state. And I guess to date, they must be right. In Italy, what May Day traditions were there? So May Day traditions in Italy are very, very regional in medieval Italy, and it has different names. So there's Calendi Maggio, which literally means the calends of May, which comes from the Latin term for May 1st. The calends, for those who don't know, is the first day of each month. So the calends of May is May 1st. The calends of June is June 1st. So therefore, in Latin, in the Roman Empire, it was called, you know, calendmaius, calendum maius. I forget what the declension is, but that eventually in Italian that became in uh, Florence, calendomaggio, and it's also known as the Cunt Canti Maggio. The other name is basically the singing of the May, because there's this tradition of song that goes along with it, of singing these basically singing poems, right, that celebrate the Maying, the return of spring. And there were it was a very ornate set of ceremonies in Florence, and different guilds would set up different areas where brigades were held, where balls were held, where feasts were held. They would dress in green, they would have greenery, and there would be competitions, and sometimes the competitions between the different brigades would apparently get violent, because why not? Any excuse for violence, right? So I'll be covering that in the video I'm doing. And then in France, in the various courts of France, they had this fun tradition called the Court of the Flower and the Court of the Leaf. And on May Day, you would either choose or be assigned a faction, in quotes, and you would have to represent that faction for the rest of the year until the next May Day. So you'd have to write poetry in defense of the superiority of the leaf or the superiority of the flower. Which part of the plant is more important, is the truly superior part of the plant. And so, you would actually then wear the insignia of the faction that you were representing, the flower or the leaf, on your person in some way. So there was some pretty fun, courtly love traditions involved in that. I'm still in the process of researching, but what I found so far would certainly make for some fun medievalist events. And hell, even an excuse for a fight, a May Day fight, brawling between brigades. Why not? Let's see. What other research have I casting my eyes about? Oh, I have also, of course, been working on the long promised piece on the dangers of using art for the interpretation of historical clothing. If you have a particular painting, pre 1500 painting, we'll go with pre 1550 painting, that you would like me to look at in terms of how useful or authentic it would be for interpreting historical clothing. let me know, and I will include it in my with the list of paintings, pretty seminal ones that I'm going to be using as examples of what to look for and what to ignore when examining historical art from the perspective of using it to recreate actual clothing that actual people wore. If you just want to make a costume, you make a costume, and that's cool. Like, I support that 100%. But this is for people who who really want to get to the the get closer to the truth, is probably the way I would phrase it, about what people actually were, and therefore maybe want to avoid certain pitfalls of misinterpreting medieval art for that purpose, because medieval art is super symbolic and super complicated, and you can't just look at a painting and assume that because someone is painted wearing those garments or that hat, that real people actually ever wore them in the history of humanity. And there's also some dangers, some cultural dangers that people might not be aware of in interpreting certain works of art. For instance, paintings depicting the crucifixion or the betrayal of Jesus might actually show the way Jewish people were actually dressing in the 15th century. But maybe you shouldn't make that outfit unless you're, portraying a Jewish impression, because that was very specific to the way the Jews were required to dress in certain places in the 15th century, for instance. So there's some pitfalls that one might wish to avoid, or not, but at least if you know about the pitfall, you can embrace it openly and with full awareness, which is, that's also acceptable if that's what you want to do. My main goal in everything I do is to give people the information, is to discover things, learn things, and then share that knowledge. And then how people use the knowledge is up to them. Where do you get your fabric? Ah, TK. Yeah. This amazing silk organza is a set of curtains that I got off of eBay. Yeah, you can get some of the most amazing quality fabrics on eBay in from their curtain section, because curtains tend to be made of really high quality fabric. And then interior decor houses usually have floor models. And then when the season is done or that display is done, they take the floor models off, put them back in their packaging, and then they get sold to resellers. And then they end up on places like eBay or in Goodwill for really, really cheaply. I do also sometimes buy fabric. There's also a fabric outlet, a true fabric outlet online called Fabric Guru. A lot of my stuff I've gotten from there, and so it's an outlet, so it's really significantly reduced prices for, instead of, don't hate me for what I'm about to say, instead of $300 a yard for silk velvet, 20 to $40 a yard for silk velvet, for instance. But they also have really good deals on plainer silk, where I've easily found kind of plain weave or silk on Fabric Guru for $7 a yard. So fabricguru.com is another good resource. And no, they are not a channel sponsor. They really should be, though, considering how often I hawk their wares. Armor and Casting is a channel sponsor, though. This morning, I'm not wearing anything of theirs, unfortunately, but they do the most amazing replica pieces of medieval jewelry from all periods of medieval history and are constantly expanding their range. And their prices are super reasonable, and they're a Ukrainian company. So by supporting them, you are helping support the effort to toss out the tyrant from the Ukraine. Yeah, but their stuff is quality, and that in and of itself is worthy. So yeah, that's kind of a short summary of where I generally get my fabrics. I also shop in a lot of thrift stores in the curtains and bedding section, because you can always find amazing things there. And occasionally fabrics.com or fabricstore.com. The quality of their fabric is variable, though. It's not as, I will say that it seems that fabrics that are intended for the garment industry are not as well made as fabrics intended for the interior decor industry. And that kind of makes sense, because if the fabric is meant to go on a sofa, it needs to take a lot of wear and tear. Whereas, of course, you're just supposed to wear a garment once or twice and throw it away, right? Like, that's the economy in which we live, apparently. Do mosaics count? San Vitali Basilica in Ravenna has mosaics of, yeah. So mosaics are art too. So you have to interpret them. You have to look at them just as carefully. So the mosaics in Ravenna, oh my God, they are amazing. Um, have you been to Ravenna, Susan? Ah, I love Ravenna. Ravenna is one of those like stupidly hidden gems of Europe because it's so close to Venice that it always gets overshadowed by Venice. Okay, I've got to stand up and stretch, guys. It always, I'll back up. It always gets overshadowed by Venice. And so no one ever goes to Ravenna. Ravenna has these amazingly well preferred Byzantine churches. It's also where Dante is buried, by the way, because he was in exile when he died. Even though he has a tomb in Santa Croce in Florence, his body ain't there. Um, so yeah, Ravenna has the most famous Byzantine mosaics are in Ravenna, for those who don't know. And so yeah, they are beautiful. Those mosaics are amazing. But um, for the emperor and the empress, because they're contemporary, I would say they're actually probably pretty accurate representations because they're not posthumous. It's when you start getting into posthumous depictions that who knows, but they're contemporary with them. And so those are probably pretty accurate. Now, where you may or may not be accurate would be some of the saints that are depicted with them on those various frescoes. Um, but also, Byzantine art is very conservative and it's very stylized. So they might be wearing, their royal robes, but that doesn't necessarily represent what the average Byzantine, even the average Byzantine aristocrat was wearing on a day-to-day basis, or even the emperor and empress on a day-to-day basis. Sorry, I've got to stretch again. I don't usually sit still for this long. For those of you who actually know me in person, you know I'm a real jitterbug. Constantly moving. Ah, so yeah, even mosaics have to be uh, you have to understand art based on the message, also the message, oops, sorry, the message that the artist is trying to convey and the conventions of art in the court in which that artist is working. No, not close enough. Sorry, everyone. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Gara, welcome. Nice to see you this evening. Afternoon, morning. I don't know what time it is. Thank you for joining. Kit turned on YouTube and your life came up at the top of the list. Yay! Thank God for the algorithm actually doing what it's supposed to bloody well do. Yay! Oh my God. You know how many people find my channel accidentally and then ask me where I've been all this time? I've been here. I've been putting out content. Sorry that the algorithm doesn't show you what you would actually like to see. That is the world in which we live, sadly. Ugh, sorry, this came undone. Push my braids back. Yeah, so I'm working on a new kerchief, Gara. This is going to be the new topper for my miters, my turrets, the not a hennin, as I affectionately call them. And so I'm just working on hemming this big, huge piece of organza. And we were just talking about the dangers of interpreting art for medieval clothing. And the question was actually about Ravenna and the mosaics there. Those mosaics, for those of you who can, if you can, go to Ravenna, see those mosaics. And if you can do it, if those churches are open at nighttime, hands down, the best time to see those mosaics is in the light at night because of the way they sparkle. Oh, amazing, especially if they're doing a candlelight thing. Really amazing. Let me see. No, but it's on my bucket list. But the city was in the news because Charles and Camilla visited and toured the basilica as well as Dante's tomb. Oh, yeah, I did not know that they'd been there, but Ravenna is definitely a place to go. We actually ended up going there accidentally on a Mediterranean cruise. We were supposed to have an overnight in Venice, but one of the Costa ships, I think the same Costa ship that sank a couple of years ago because of that idiot captain showing off for his girlfriend. Anyway, the Costa ship ended up getting our berth, so we had to redirect the day before. And we ended up docking at Ravenna, and that was actually one of the happiest itinerary changes I've ever experienced because there was almost no one there. No tourists because there is no cruise port in Ravenna. There is an industrial port. That seems pretty grim, actually. And there was no one else there. No, we didn't have hordes of tourists to contend with. And we were able to explore this fifth century time capsule, sixth century time capsule pretty much on our own. It was amazing. More amazing that these churches have survived. It's a testament to Byzantine architecture, really, and their engineering that these structures are still standing after 1,500 years of warfare in Europe. Yeah, so let's see. Other discoveries I have made in my perambulations this week. Um, those expense accounts I mentioned for the kings of France and Roi René. So some of you may recall, this is related, I promise, that I talked about finding this extant garment belonging to Isabelle de France, one of the she-wolves of France, Edward II's very powerful French queen, um, the mother of Edward III. She has this garment that people are now, I'm pretty certain, incorrectly referring to as an aketon, and it's an extant garment, very similar to her brother King Louis's shirt, which is preserved in Notre Dame de Paris. And this garment is this padded quilted garment that is basically sleeveless, but it's like a sleeveless chemise like this, but without sleeves, but padded and lined. And the idea is that, it's cold in the winter time. Um, Central heating is absolutely not a thing in medieval France. And so you would wear one of these padded garments under your clothes as an insulating layer. It's the same thing they do in Korea in this era, by the way, padded underlayers. So it's really funny how that parallel development sprang up. And Isabella's Aketon ended up in a convent, in the convent of, I don't remember offhand. The convent in it's a convent. I think it's a convent in Paris. And it ended up she ended up donating it. I don't know why, but she lived there for a while as she was educated there, as I recall. And her Akaton just ended up staying there, I guess, when she was sent to England to become uh, Prince Edward's princess at that time. And it's very well preserved. It is crazy well preserved. Oh my God, this thing is amazingly well preserved. And it is not on display. It is not on display. You cannot go see it. You can maybe write the curator and ask to be shown it. But that's why it hasn't really made it into any of the books because it's not on display. But there was a French researcher in 2018, I believe, who managed to get access to it because it actually did go on special display for an exhibit, and they managed to get access to it. This individual, I don't actually I've read their report. I'm assuming it's a woman, but I could be no, I'm pretty certain it's a woman because she was making one for herself. 95% certain it's a woman. Anyway, this researcher was looking into reconstructing one, and so she actually got to go and look at it and touch it. There's pictures of her hands touching this 700-year-old garment. And it is beautiful. It is the construction, it is so gorgeously put together. It is so well preserved, and it shows so many details about things, about garments that are worn, like really worn. For example, it has patches on the inside in exactly the places that all of my smocks end up needing patches because they wear away at the shoulders. And her patches look exactly like mine, like made in exactly the same way, even though I made mine because that seemed practical, but it turns out it was the authentic patching method. Yay, accidental authenticity for the win. And her so it's not it's they call it an hackathon, but an hackathon, as far as I can tell in my reading of 300 years of inventories and expense accounts and chronicles and hackathon, that term seems to only have been used for a military padded garment, not for a woman's padded garment that goes under the clothes specifically for warmth. That being said, and this all connects, um, in the expense accounts that those wonderful late 19th century antiquarians transcribed and published, there are entries from the 1350s from the Queen of Hungary, who I guess she maybe was the Queen Dowager of Hungary. I have to look up why her stuff is appearing in the expense accounts of the King of France. Anyway, this expense entry was from like 1353, and it talks about a chemise doublée. Doublé meaning doubled, meaning lined, that is interlined, that is padded, quilted and padded with cotton. So, the term doublé, doublet, actually then it appears multiple times in that context of garments for women, like that seem to be padded undergarments for warmth. So it seems that the word doublet would actually be a more appropriate, historically accurate term for this padded women's garment designed specifically, most likely to provide that extra layer of warmth in the body, not an aketon. So I have not found any of I've never seen the word hackathon. I looked it up all over the place. There's actually an online dictionary of Middle French, Dictionnaire du Moyen Français, Moyen Français, and um, none of their entries for hackathon, they have lots of entries for hackathon, show have any relation to female garments. It's all male military garments. So, or maybe not even male, but military for certain. So I don't think it's correct to call Isabelle de France's chemise padded, quilted and padded chemise, padded and quilted chemise, and aketon. I think it probably would have been called a doublé. Let's see. Any other comments? Okay. If you're just joining, please hit that thumbs up. And if you get a chance after the video publishes, if you can just go and just leave any comment, even just an emoji, really helps support that algorithm. Yeah, I hate that this is the ecosystem in which I have to operate. Oh, also, for those of you who've subscribed and wonder why you're not getting notifications when I publish things or do things like this, you actually have to go and not only click on the notification bell, you have to like right click on it and choose the setting that says choose what you want to, how you want to be notified. Otherwise, the algorithm will decide for you just what things, the things of which it should notify you, which might not be the same things that you think it should notify you. So, yeah, isn't that annoying? Oops. Well, just committed the usual mistake of not holding the eye of the needle between my fingers so that the thread does not slide through. That's what happens when I get excited in talking about things. I stop paying attention to these little details of what I'm doing. That's why I sometimes end up having to redo the things I sew on these live chats. What the hell was I thinking? Oh, I was talking, wasn't I? Uh, Oh, let's see. I am working on actually translating a bunch of those garment reports for these extant garments where the reports are only available in languages that I understand. So in the case of Isabelle's doublé, I plan on translating the salient, like doing a translated summary, not of the whole paper, but translating the salient points of from the report that this researcher reported about the construction of the garment, things that'll be, because some of the techniques used to assemble this thing, it just makes so much sense and would be really useful in applying those techniques in making even a non-padded garment or a non-quilted garment. I'm also working on the extant farsetto, a similar translation for the extant farsetto of Pandolfo Malatesta, died in the 1430s, which again, tons of handy construction tips if you for applying to your own medieval garments. And then I'm going to do the same for Diego di Cavaniglia's extant farsetto. So that's kind of my goal, is to work through these various reports and produce videos on each of these garments, probably one video per garment, probably, to kind of get the word out there for people who are interested in these kind of construction details, but aren't fluent in Italian or French or German or whatever. Of course, part of the problem is, yes, you could use Google Translate, but I'm going to tell you that for sewing language, mm, Google Translate is not going to be the bestest approach you could possibly want to take, because you're definitely not going to get the right details that will help you reconstruct stitches. It's going to sound real weird. So, yeah, that's kind of that's one of the things I've been working on the side, in addition to working on my piece on my video essay on late medieval Irishmen's clothing within the Pale. which has been paralleling the research into late medieval Irish women's clothing, probably within the pale and outside the pale, because there's just not as much information on women's clothing as there is on men's clothing from the late Middle Ages in Ireland, unfortunately. But the short of it is, they didn't wear a kilt in medieval Ireland. The lena is not always yellow and never big sleeved until the 16th century. And yeah, things are not, Irish fashion changed just as quickly and just as often as fashions changed anywhere else. So your mileage will vary depending on your decade, your century for certain, and maybe even your decade. But that, yes, even though fashions did change, they they're also at the same time more conservative, so they'll hold on to the same thing for longer, actually, than other people will. For my patrons out there, I'm going to be scheduling another live Zoom session for all of you, my channel members and patrons. So this is where we will actually meet on Zoom face to face, and you'll get to talk to me, actually talk. And if you want, you can show me your projects and I can give you feedback on them, or we can just sit and chat and while we work on things together. So it's a chance to get direct one-on-one interaction. So that is a perk for my patrons and my channel members. So Gara, how are things out there in Antir? I hear, what's today? I guess today's Friday for you all. I hear you guys are going to Camelin, which I've never been there. I've seen pictures, so that sounds really interesting. For those who don't know, Camelin is purports to be like a 14th century village for, kind of like a medieval fair instead of a Renaissance fair. And I guess we're kind of hoping that maybe we could start using for events. It would be a great place for an immersive event like my Decameron, for instance. Now how 14th century it actually is, the pictures I've seen tell me that it's like it passes the 60-foot rule for architecture, I guess. I don't think it's I don't at least the pictures I've seen, it doesn't make me think that it's like those reconstructed living history villages in Denmark, where they literally built the buildings exactly as buildings were using authentic techniques, et cetera, et cetera. This is more of a it looks nice kind of place, which is fine. No criticism for me. None at all. In some cases, looks fine is better than a reconstruction, depending on the reconstruction in question. Better in the sense of possibly more usable. Speaking of usable space, yes, this is how my brain works. I was reading about usable public spaces as part of May Day celebrations, and I just thought I would bring up the reality that, in medieval Europe, they used churches. Were not this sacrosanct space that we think of them as now. Churches were often used for big communal activities like dancing, like balls, because where else are you going to get a space that big interior? Castles actually don't usually have giant great halls before the 16th century. Um, Palazzi in Italy have relatively small halls. You can maybe dance 20 people, but you certainly can't dance 100. So often churches ended up functioning as a communal party space. And this will tell you how sacrosanct they were not. There are plenty, and I mean more than one chronicler I've read who talks about dogs pissing on a, column, one of the columns in the sanctuary. So yeah, for May Day celebrations, churches also often came into play for the social activities of them, the brigades and the balls and whatnot. So, next time you want to run a big ball, just go to your local neo-Gothic church and ask if you can clear out the pews and use their sanctuary. I'm certain they'll have no problem with it whatsoever. Okay, threading the needle again. So, oh yeah, let me show you where our progress thus far. So we've gotten this much. Okay, quite a lot. This much hemmed, and we have. Oops, sorry. Okay, we have about this much left. Right. So it looks like I'm over halfway, maybe. Yeah, I am. I'm well over halfway. So that's good. Making good progress. So for those who don't know, I'm making a kerchief. So this looks like a veil, and yes, we would call it that modernly, but they seem to be called kerchiefs more often than not in medieval English uh, expense accounts, and they're called couvre-chef, which kerchief comes from couvre-chef in French. And this one is actually going to be a special kind. It's going to actually be, oh no, I lost my needle. Sigh. Okay. I'm certain the cats will find it for me. It'll come out in there. Oh, there it is. Yay. Triumph. Needle not lost. Um, this is the kind of kerchief that actually has a facial frame part a little bit like this, actually, and then the veil is attached onto the back of that. And in the project vlog I'm going to make, I will delve into all the imagery because I found a lot of it. Once I started looking for this kind of thing, I see it everywhere in illuminated miniatures, in portraits, and even in illustrations of, say, the Decameron from the 1480s. So yeah, I decided finally, yes, that is the kind of veil topper thing I would like for my turret. I need to make one because I like having things to frame my face. That makes me feel the prettiest, and this is a nice way to have something frame my face. And also, I think it will make it easier to actually attach the veil to the turret instead of a little bit of a struggle that it is now, which also I think makes it a more authentic approach. um, wow, the comments, the chat has kind of died down. That's unusual. I've just been holding forth in such a fascinating fashion that you all are stupefied. I'm really joking. I do not think of myself in those glowing terms at all. That was sardonic self-deprecation for those who don't know me well enough to recognize the tone. Oh, I need to get the condotero to make me a proper leather sheath for these. These Korean snips are insanely sharp, like maybe cut bone sharp, really dangerously sharp. So they really need something more than this sad little plastic sheath in which they come because yeah. Okay. Snip. The thing about this embroidery silk that I'm using for this, because it's so fine, and it works well with this really fine organza, um, it's not the most plied because it's supposed to be for embroidery. Typical me not using something for its intended purpose. Anyway, that means once you sew, especially with a whip stitch, there's a lot of the circular winding motion, it eventually actually starts to unply, which means you can't cut it too long because you're just going to end up unplying it and it won't be useful for multiple inches, but you don't want to keep having to rethread and re-anchor and all of that sort of stuff. So there's kind of a happy medium between too long and too short, and you'll kind of that's different for each kind of thread. So you just kind of have to get to know your thread and then decide what the magic length is and then apply that as you're rethreading wax. Okay. So let's see other discoveries. And I'm looking off camera. It's because I'm looking at the books that I've been trawling through as a sort of memory aid. I meant to actually jot, like, this is what I mean to do, honestly. I would like to get a little more organized about this. I mean to keep a little notebook next to me when I'm delving down these rabbit holes of medievalist knowledge and jot down these little things just to keep a reminder of all the things I'd like to share with you guys out there. Unfortunately, I've just got back from, as I mentioned, the 3-week world tour from hell, and the jet lag is kicking my butt particularly hard this time. So I'm not as with it or well slept as maybe I should be to do something as organized as jotting down my my observations instead of just wildly galumping through these resources, going, "Wow, that's so neat! Yay, more knowledge!" Yeah, that's kind of generally how I approach research, by the way. When people ask me, "Why won't you get a PhD?" No, doesn't interest me. That academic gauntlet, no thank you. That seems so joyless. Oh, joyless. In my head, this makes sense. Byzantine food. Actually, it was the academic gauntlet. So, for those who are not familiar with medievalist.net, highly recommend you go check out that website. It is a fantastic resource for lovers of medieval history and especially practitioners of living history and SCA, whatever your flavor of medieval living history is, because they really do a lot of research into the practical sides of medieval history. And they present a lot of the great research and they have experts on, and they've got a podcast, at least a weekly, sometimes bi-weekly podcast, or semi-weekly podcast. And the topics that they cover are fascinating. The experts they get on are always interesting and really wide range. I mean, from medieval Korean queens and their power to Byzantine food, the latest one I listened to. And I learned a lot of interesting things. So Apicius, for those who are familiar with Apicius, doesn't really count. He's not Byzantine, right? He's ancient Roman. He predates the Byzantine Empire. And apparently, according to this expert, there are no actual proper cookbooks that survive from Byzantium, from the Eastern Roman Empire, from the medieval Eastern Roman Empire. None survive. So to reconstruct medieval Byzantine food is quite a trick because you have to trawl through a lot of different sources to find information. You have to read chronicles and you have to read court ordinances and archaeology, and it's not as easy. And those of you who study medieval Western European cuisine are going to laugh at me. It's not as easy it is in Western Europe, where we have literally dozens, if not hundreds, of extant cookbooks that have survived. But this person, this scholar who's about to defend his dissertation on, I mean, it's kind of cool. His dissertation is on medieval Eastern Roman Empire cuisine, which is pretty cool. What we modernly call Byzantine, but was never called that in the Middle Ages. They just called themselves Roman, and I think we called them the Greeks. By we I mean we Westies, we Western Europeans just called them the Greeks, which is funny because they thought of themselves as the Romans. Anyway, so he has trawled through so many different primary sources to extract what knowledge he could about cuisine in Byzantium. And one of the fascinating takeaways for me from his podcast was that the Byzantines, the Eastern Romans, they had like 11 different tastes. We have five, maybe six if you count umami, right? Sweet, sour, etc. They had a way more nuanced sense of palate. Like, they even had a flavor that was no flavor. Things like water and egg whites are given as an example in the original sources of this no flavor. And I can't remember what the medieval Greek word for no flavor was. But they also had, like, pungent was a flavor for them. So, and in that category are things like garlic and um, asafoetida, like kind of sulfur containing things, like that counts as pungent. Is actually a flavor for them. So it indicates that their palate was just clearly a lot more sophisticated than ours. Also, apparently, the Eastern Romans were still in love with fish sauce, with garum, which is fermented fish guts. For those who don't know what garum is, um, and even though the Vietnamese and Thai fish sauce is kind of like a close cousin, but probably not exactly the same, from what I understand. But the thing about fish sauce is that it contains a lot of umami, so it has a lot of flavor enhancing properties. So if you use it sparingly, then it will boost the flavors. If you use it heavily, then it will just taste like fish sauce. But apparently, according to especially Western Europe, the Frankish visitors who visited the court, they complained pretty vociferously about everything just being drenched in fish sauce. Which, yeah, especially if you're coming from, France or England, I could imagine that flavor would be highly offensive. Oh, oh, I apparently on this screen my chat has frozen, but on this screen we've gotten a lot more chat. Okay, sorry, I've missed a whole bunch of comments because it's not showing on my main screen. I don't know why. I'm not Amish. This is a 15th century lady in her private room impression and or missed so many comments. I'm sorry, everyone. I don't know why. What? No. I'm back. Is everyone still there? I apologize. I have no idea what just happened. The cut off, but it's back, so that's great. And I don't know why, but my live chat, I'm gonna see if I try switching. And it gives me, oh look, there's a whole bunch more comments. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. My screen here froze, so let me go and see. Remember, oh, thank you, Susan. We're kidnapping your condottiero tomorrow. I did hear that. I'm very excited for you to take him to Cumlin Village. That will be fantastic. Oh, Thomas is here. Yay. Hi, Thomas. Let's see. Um, Cumlin is under new and more friendly collaboration management. Ooh, that sounds great. Um, I'm hoping that means, Gara, that we can maybe start using it for events because let me tell you, yes, we can all use our imagination to imagine that a site is medieval, but it's just better if you don't have to do that. Having used genuine medieval sites for medieval events, it's better objectively. uh, let me see any other comments. Again, how are you sewing the corners? Is the comment. Okay. Question. So let me get you up here, show you how to finish the corners, the hems. So it's a technique called mitering the corner. And this is the same technique that's used in like high quality napkins, actually. So basically, once we get up here, okay, so let's see if I were to fold that over and we have, let's say that we've done this hem, this seam. No, this hem. Yes, this hem. Right. So then I fold this side down to make at a 45-degree angle. Let me see, hold on. At a 45-degree angle. Oh, this camera sucks. Why are you being so sucky, camera? At a 45-degree angle like that. And then you fold that over. And that is what is called a mitered corner. So that is how you finish nice square corners really neatly. I do have a video, a very good succinct tutorial on this channel. Yeah. Mitering the corners. Really handy technique to have. Okay, moving on. So yeah, this podcast on medieval Byzantine food, really fascinating. The flavors were interesting. Apparently, also the Byzantine people really liked fatty foods. I can get behind that. I like fatty foods too. Apparently, one of their favorite things was to have soup with like lamb tallow in it, just or pork or pig fat just added to it to boost the flavor. And that completely makes sense because one, fat is very good for caloric intake in a time when getting calories is actually not that easy. And two, flavor, of course, or fat, of course, enhances the flavors of your food. So that completely made sense to me. And let's see, other interesting takeaways from the Byzantine cuisine. Of course, they pointed out that it can be really hard. It's easy to get an idea of palace cuisine because there's lots of records about palace life. It's much harder to get an idea, a feel for the average Eastern Roman in the street and what they may or may not have been eating. There are apparently some episodes, some moralizing episodes even about street food, but it's hard to tell how accurate that representation of the street food is because apparently when this researcher started looking into it, he realized it was a trope that appears in ancient Roman texts as well, which means that the street food depicted might just be a copy straight over from that and might not represent what medieval Greeks were eating in Byzantium, in Constantinople, for instance. So there were a lot of challenges for this gentleman in his research, but I can empathize that actually the challenges make the quest much more rewarding. It's much more fun to have to find something than to have it spoon fed to you. At least that's my opinion. I don't know. What do you think? Do you prefer your research to go easily, or do you prefer a good quest that hopefully results in actual outcomes instead of, a fruitless journey? But I personally prefer the quest. The quest is part of the fun for me. The exploration is part of the thrill. It's just like exploring historical garments for me is in part figuring out the puzzle of how to make them. Um, Based on original garments, yes, but you know, once you get into later periods where we literally have sewing manuals that tell you how to do it step by step, I'm like, it's too easy. Where's the challenge? Where's the unknown? Where's the conjectural creative aspect that that earlier fashions demand if you're going to recreate them? Let's see. I've decided to do a deep dive down the rabbit hole um, in Ravenna San Vitale. I'm assuming you meant Susan. Hi, Miss Megan Beckett. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for sticking around, Marco, despite the live stream having bizarrely cut out and cut back in. God knows. And Gara, thank you for passing on those kind words from my condottiero. I was kind of hoping he wouldn't be on the road yet. I was hoping he'd still be spending time with the boys, but whatever. Whatever. It is what it is, as they say. Um, yeah, so let's see. What else? Um, there is there are a whole bunch of new books that we actually just purchased. My condottiero, my agent, purchased for me from a second, I think a half price books. And it's a whole bunch of facsimiles of expensive 15th century illuminated manuscript. Not copy, I mean, facsimiles, high quality facsimiles. Clearly, this half-price books did not bother to look up the cost of these because most of them are out of print, and they're super duper high quality, fabric bound. So those will be getting added to my library soon. Stay tuned for that exploration, that unboxing perhaps when he returns with these books. Otherwise, I have found some new digital resources that I'll be sharing to my Patreon and my YouTube channel members. Primary sources, digital resources. I'll share them there first. Of course, they get priority, and then eventually I'll make them available to the general public. But there's been some really interesting things I've been finding. Unfortunately, I have to buckle down when I do it and stay on one source before wandering down the next rabbit hole. But this digital dictionary of Middle French is fantastic because it actually provides you with the sources for all of their entries and all of the primary sources. And then I can actually go and look those up. And generally, I've been finding digital versions of those primary sources. So it's been a really good find. There's also an online Middle English dictionary for those who don't know, which is equally, if not better organized than the Middle French one. And there's a online dictionary of Middle Irish. So, can do all kinds of you can learn amazing things in these dictionaries about fashion because a lot of the entries that they use to help define their terms are come from expense accounts talking about clothing. So there's or other aspects of medieval material culture, not necessarily just clothing. So in looking up words, you can actually see the primary sources from which they derive that definition for these terms. Really useful resources. Mhm. God, it feels like I've been whip stitching this thing forever. Let's see. It depends on whether the research stage is a goal in itself for you or whether it's a chore between you and what you want from the research. Nevis, that is a fair point. That is a fair point. I guess I've never been interested in a period that didn't automatically require a lot of research. So, yeah, maybe I've just made a virtue out of a vice. Or out of an adverse situation. Susan says, I like the quest because it's more fun to search than to have things fed to you. Hmm. I mean, that being said, I do enjoy, documentaries and podcasts and whatnot where they do spoon feed things to you as well. But often those also make me aware of other corners of material culture that I need to explore in more depth. And the nice thing about medievalist.net is that often the guests they have on are on because they're publishing a book on the topic. So, you can actually buy the book and then get more details. And often those kind of secondary source history books are, especially the modern ones, tend to be excellent as a way to access, to learn about other primary sources for your own research because their bibliography sections are just a treasure trove of sources. Thankfully, that's the way it goes in the modern world, unlike that terrible, the best and worst ever book on medieval fashion, um, Se vestir au Moyen Âge, clothes in the Middle Ages or something like that. I don't remember what the English translation is of it. Where these two researchers seem to do amazing research, and they've referenced all of these great expense accounts and chronicles, and do they cite a single one? No. They provide a bibliography in the back, but they don't cite a single piece of information at all anywhere in the text. So for all you know, they're just making up bullshit. That's a little frustrating. Now, the process itself is one of the goals for some people. I sometimes get tired of how much research it takes, though, and eventually want to be finished already. Yeah, Nevis, I can appreciate that too. Takeda says that is something I find odd. Why so many account ledgers going so far back? One of the main surviving set of records, land deeds, major purchases, etc., makes sense. Why? Yeah. So account ledgers, the reason they go so far back is because they ended up being in archives. And well, first off, they're written on parchment. They're written on vellum, so they're really durable. And they end up in archives, and they just kind of get stuck in a corner and forgotten about. And that's because that they aren't in some cases. Oh, in some cases they end up in archives because of death inventories and tax records also. Because in places that had taxes, like Florence, for instance, where you actually had to do a tax return every year, so an inventory was taken every so often for the catastor. That doesn't sound right. Pretty certain that is the right word though. The catastor. Um, every few years, your entire household was inventoried so that they knew how much you should be taxed. And so cities are just really good historically about keeping records. And if the archives don't burn down, then it's all good. Or if revolutionaries don't come along and burn your archives down, then it's all good. Then they survive. When material items had so much more value than they do now, right? We have a lot of, let's be honest, a lot of disposable cheap junk in our homes, right? And I am no exception there because unfortunately my condottiero is acquisitive. Retail therapy for the win. But it used to be that objects were expensive. And so, when you died, objects had value. And so in death inventories were taken to account for the value of your estate and how it should be divvied up amongst your heirs, for instance, or if a tax should be levied on it, all that sort of stuff. So that's in part why a lot of these expense accounts survive. Also because great medieval families were also hoarders. They just would shove crap in chests in corners and forget about it. Very frequently happened, especially when you have attics. You just, shove stuff in a chest, it gets shoved up to the attic, and it sits there for 600 years. Yeah. Big house syndrome, I guess. Um, yeah, but once fabric odds and ends, when food is consumed, you think they would ditch those records. Yeah, no. They didn't. And also, so it also depends on how the records were kept. In Italy, they had in Florence particularly, some other parts of Italy too, but mostly it's a Florentine method of keeping records. They had this tradition, this practice called ricordanze. And that gets translated, frankly, and I think incorrectly, as a memoir because it's more than a memoir. Like a memoir is more just kind of a historical document of your personal life, maybe some of your feelings and thoughts. This is more than that. This documents the happenings in your life and also the major purchases for major events, anything that's kind of considered to be of importance to the household. And purchases and commissions of garments and whatnot were considered of major importance to a household. And so those records were just kind of preserved as part of the family history. So that is another way that things like that end up being preserved. But and that might also be the same thing for the ledgers, is that it's counted as being part of your great family's history, and so you want to preserve that because it shows, how much how important you were as a family, that you have these expense accounts dating back centuries as kind of proof of your nobility, right? I feel like that might be part of it as well. So my junk drawer of anything I've done will be the thing of value to future historians. Yep. God, you know what? For us now exploring the middens, people's trash pits that have been buried in from the Middle Ages, some of the most valuable information we have about medieval fashion comes from the trash pile. So, yeah, why not? Did Florence have a tax rebate for those who would give to Florence a new church, municipal buildings? I don't think so. I don't think there was so much a rebate. The whole idea of donating structures like that was one, it cemented your family as being powerful and influential. Was the ultimate flex, shall we say, for your onore. But two, ideally it would buy you a place in heaven, right? So that's more important than a tax rebate in the 15th century. Securing that spot in heaven. Very much on the priority list. Archaeologists love landfills. Oh boy, do we ever. Oh, yeah. Find me a good trash pile, a filled in well, an old not middens, but there's another word for it. Yeah, the place where the gong farmer would go. Yeah, really great places to look for clues as to the details of daily life, as disgusting as that may sound. Yep. For ancient Rome, especially in the German in the Roman settlements in what's now modern day Germany, the Romans loved throwing things down wells. It was a favorite activity of theirs was to throw their garbage down the well. So at the Saalburg in Germany, which is a reconstructed um, like first century AD Roman fortress or second century AD Roman fortress, they have a museum of the archaeological finds, and there's an entire shoe section of extant shoes that they excavated from the wells of this settlement specifically. And first off, these shoes are chef's kiss beautiful. I mean, wow, just wow. Would look absolutely just fine on people's feet today as being a very fashionable handmade, leather shoe. Probably someone would actually look at them and said, "Oh, those were made in Italy, weren't they?" Why, yes, they were inspired by a Italian culture of a certain sort. Um, but they're well preserved, they're beautiful, and yeah, they found them in a well. So thank God for unsustainable trash disposal practices, I guess. I'm not certain that throwing your trash into your water source is necessarily the best plan. I mean, for all we know, they probably started throwing them in when the well had dried up and they had to sink a well somewhere else, is what I'm assuming anyway, that they weren't throwing their trash in an active well. At least we can hope they weren't. The Romans were more clever than that, damn it. Really? Did you roll off again, needle? Oh my goodness. Okay, time to stand up and stretch again, but first, an update. Okay, so here is our M, front and back. Nice. And here is how much we have left. Sorry, not very much actually. And if you compare that to where we started, this is how much this is how much we've done. And yeah, we only have this tiny little bit left. Is why I definitely need to stand up and stretch again. Cesspits, thank you. Thank you, Miss Megan Beckett. That is exactly what I was talking about. Were King Renee's household account books for the years? No, Renee's books, these expense accounts are actually cover like the 1450s to 1470s, I think. Sorry, I'm going to back this up so I can actually get some decent stretching in. 1460s to 1470s, I believe. The entries I was specifically looking at were from the 1470s because that's more my period of interest. But yeah, they actually contained quite a few martial entries. So he was clearly gearing up for some kind of war. Oh, how is another interesting thing? Ah, yes, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Another interesting thing, if you're just joining, I'm stretching because I've been sitting and sewing for an hour. My muscles are starting to hate me for that. Humans weren't meant to sit still for that long. Anyway, um, the King Renee's expense accounts actually have entries for garments that are specifically indicated for sailors. So someone asked me in a recent-ish one of the many live streams I've done in the last couple of months. It might have been one with Philip from Irish Medieval History, or it might have been one of these sew along. Someone asked me about sailors' clothing as a separate thing. I think it was one with Philip. We were talking about Irish clothing. It was the one we did after the release of the late medieval Irish clothing series. And they asked if clothing was different for sailors, and I said I hadn't really found evidence of that. Well, here in this expense entry account entry from the 1470s, clearly garments are ordered specifically labeled as sailors, versions of those garments. Sailors' shirts and sailors' chausses. Chausses are the stockings that would be laced into your pourpoint. So it doesn't mean that they were necessarily cut differently. It could just be that they were treated in a certain way to make them extra waterproof, for instance, that they were lined in a certain way to make them extra, more practical for life at sea. We don't know what exactly it means because unfortunately these entries aren't that specific. It just says in order for sailors' chausses and sailors' shirts. Great. But that does indicate that clearly there was something that was different about it. But I don't think it was particularly different in the cut or style because the visual depictions of sailors from the 15th century don't show them being dressed differently than anyone else. So I think it must have been something about the construction, about the materials or the layers, the padding, stitches extra sturdy, something along those. Maybe things were cut slightly more generously for increased mobility, but I don't think it would be like noticeably different. Like by the 18th century, sailors' clothing is real different from what you would wear on land because ships are so sophisticated and so much different than they are in the 15th century that maybe they needed to go that way. Stretching. Now I'm picturing chausses with bell bottoms. Nice, nice. Wool clothes, not linen for sailors. So interestingly, that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Most there are records. Most clothes are made of wool in the Middle Ages. There's very few garments that are made of linen. Undergarments are like all undergarments are made of linen, but overgarments are like 90. They're either made of silk or they're made of wool. There's vanishingly few entries for things made of fustian, but those aren't usually overgarments. Those are usually arming garments. There is one record of a fustian livery ensemble for, I think one of the clients of the Medici. Might have been the Pazzi actually, which would be unfortunate. But fustian is a linen cotton blend. There's just not a lot of evidence for linen overgarments as being a common thing. So it actually might be the other way around. It might be that linen was the fabric of choice for these sailors' garments rather than wool. I the problem with wool is it's waterproof until it's not. And then it becomes a heavy, sopping, deadly mess. So yeah, could be maybe the other way around. But yeah, the norm in Europe is things to be made of wool or silk for overgarments. Like this is a linen kirtle, and it's not really authentic. I made it because I made it this way back before I understood that. But also, I do play in much more humid, hotter climates than anywhere that medieval Europe had to offer, like Thailand. And so having a linen underlayer under my heavy silk gowns actually really does help with that evaporative cooling. So full disclosure, but, you know, I just give the information. What you choose to do on your own medieval journey is your choice, and I applaud that. Let me see. I think I remember reading something about woolen undergarments specifically for foresters and related jobs, and then it was specifically because of the liability to get wet. Yeah, maybe, but and I could see that. On the other hand, wool, like I said, it's real water resistant until it isn't. And then it becomes a sponge like you wouldn't believe. Take it from someone who's been out hiking in her medieval wool gown in a full rainstorm. I gained like 20 pounds in water, if not more. That was exciting. Yeah. Um, I mean, okay, on the other hand, thinking aloud here, um, if you treat the wool in such a way that the lanolin is preserved rather than removed, then the wool will be a lot more water resistant than wool that's had the lanolin completely washed out of it in the wool processing process. um, so maybe that's it. Maybe it's wool that's been treated a special way to retain its water resistance for longer than like wool you would might want to wear just to be more fashionable and comfortable. Because lanolin does also, can get prickly and cause allergic reactions and things like that for some people. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Wet linen can be abrasive and is, and linen is good for evaporative cooling, which is maybe not what you want when you're on a cold storm tossed sea. Yeah. Let me see. Mid-Atlantic USA is a lot more humid and warmer in the summer than most of Europe. I'd die if it were not for linen. Oh yeah, lanolin and felt are entirely different things. Yeah. So, um, yeah, there's a couple of things that it could be these sailors' chausses, these sailors' chemises, right? It could be that on the chemise specifically, they might still be linen, but maybe, the sleeves are cut in a way that allows them to be easily rolled up. Maybe they have buttons that allow them to be pinned up. There's so many different things that could mean, but it's a start. This new rabbit hole, medieval sailors clothing. Yay, one more research project that I don't need on top of the pile I already have. But it's indicative that there is a difference of some kind. And now the question would be finding more sources that tell us what that difference might be. Because otherwise it's all just conjecture. Ah, sorry, my leg was very unhappy that I sat still for that long. Okay. Ah, yeah, definitely making good progress here. Let me see if I've missed any chats because the one device is not picking up everything. Nope. Okay, good. It's caught up. Fantastic. Okay, back in we go. Oh, so, and all that excitement. What did I do with my poor, my poor needle? It keeps trying to escape me. Probably abuse my sewing things the way I abuse my clothing. Okay. So just so everyone knows where I'm going with this, eventually I'm going to be cutting off the end here. And I'm going to be folding it in half like this to make a kind of brim, shall we say, of this kerchief like this. And that's going to be the part that frames my face. See if I can demonstrate where I'm going with this. So it's going to frame my face like this. But it's only going to go back. It's going to be much neater than this, obviously. And it will gather at the back of my neck, and then I'll attach a veil so that the veil is long and drapes down long on either side. Not so that it drapes in one like this way, but that it drapes long this way, the way you see in the portrait. So this will be cut into two pieces, basically. I'll cut this length off like this. That'll become the facial frame. And then this part I will attach to that facial frame like here will get attached to the back of the facial frame. So it will come off of my miter like this, right? That's where we're going with it. Let me see. I've been experimenting with spinning in the grease recently. Oh, nice. So it'll be interesting to see if it makes a big difference to the fabric it makes if it is less water absorbent. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. Um, Miss Megan, please keep me apprised of that experiment. Once when I was doing tablet weaving to make the trim for my Botticelli Gonella costume, Botticelli's Venus Gonella costume. So I was making the trim for all of the edging and everything, tablet weaving, and I was using silk floss, which had a fantastic sheen. Um, but it would start to fray eventually. And so one of the suggestions I found to make it stop fraying that way, because it was floss and not plied, um, was to grease it with goose fat, actually. And then afterwards, I could just wash it out with dish soap by hand, obviously. And that actually worked. That worked really well, in fact. So yeah, I'll be interested to hear. So how is the working the grease in while you're spinning? How is that affecting the spinning process itself? Nevis says, I have a reproduction bonnet made of felted wool with lanolin intact. The design was specifically to be a rain hat. It does not achieve that if the lanolin is removed or not felted. Yep. No, absolutely. You lose that water resistant nature if you remove the lanolin or the wool is not felted. And just so people are clear, felting is not the same thing as fulling. Felting and fulling are two different processes. Felted wool is literally where you take felt fibers and you felt them together. Fulling is where you take woven wool and you walk the living crap out of it until the weave tightens and tightens and tightens. So those are actually two different processes. And for those who really don't know, if you ever hear about beaver fur hats, it's not it's not like they just like took a beaver hide and glued it onto a hat. They actually took the individual furs and used them. They felted the fur into a felt form, a felt blank, and then formed that. So it was this really silky, super silky. Oh my God, felted beaver hats. It's like petting a cat, right? I guess it's like petting a beaver, but makes this really silky, silky hat. And in by the 14th century, those were pretty common common luxury items, actually. They specifically were associated with Flanders. Chaucer makes reference to one in the Canterbury Tales, to a Flandrish beaver. What do you call it? Beaver chapeau? I'm trying to remember what the word he actually used in the 14th century English was, but basically translates to a Flemish beaver hat. And then, of course, by the 15th century, they're lining them. Like Charles VII has one, and I think he's actually depicted, one of his portraits shows him wearing it. He has this fantastic beaver hat with a big wide brim, and it's lined in red silk velvet. Talk about a flex. The most expensive kind of velvet, red silk velvet, and you use it to line your hat, the part that goes against your skin and gets dirty. Yeah. Good flex there, man. Good flex. Oh man. Poor, poor needle has vanished. Well, when my condottiere returns, he has a big magnet that he uses to go through the house and find all my needles and pins for me. So I'll have him do that. Let's see. Let's see. Walk the living crap out of it. Please excuse my ignorance. What does that mean? Okay, sorry. Yeah. So the name Walker, the family name Walker. So I said walk the living crap out of the wool. So the the family name Walker comes from, that means some point in your family history, distant mist of time, medieval period kind of stuff. Your family were walkers, which meant that you actually originally you would actually walk on the wool. You put the wool in a bucket with water, the wool fabric, spun, already woven, not spun, already woven wool fabric. You would put it in a bucket with water and you'd literally just stomp it. Stomp, stomp, stomp. Water is wrong, not water, sorry. Um, urine, fermented urine. I mean, yes, there's water there. It's not pure fermented urine. Usually there is some water in that solution, but and you would walk it. And the agitation, the urine would remove the fermented urine, the ammonia would remove the lanolin. It would kind of dissolve up into the fermented urine solution. And the agitation actually causes the barbs on the fibers of the wool to lock, 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 lock on each other tighter and tighter and tighter. So it actually fullers are also same. Same kind of thing, same part of that process. If you were fuller, your family is once part of the wool production process. Um, and it causes the wool to tighten, the weave to tighten, the gaps between the wet warp and the weft to tighten, and to get denser and denser and denser. So that's what I meant by walking the hell out of it. Just walk, 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 walk in a bucket, just walking in place, sort of thing. It was a job. It was, according to Tony Robinson, possibly one of the worst jobs in history. Which, I don't know. I think I think the 19th century has some of the worst jobs in history, honestly. Let me see. You beat it up essentially, yeah. Mills were often used. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So by the 14th century, in most parts of Europe, they actually had water-driven mills for this. And yeah, the water would actually drive hammers, which took over that process. But before that, you literally that's why it was called walking, because originally you used to walk on it. And at kind of the cottage level, that was still done. Homespun was still, if you couldn't afford to pay to use the mill, because obviously, usually the local lord or the abbey, local church institution, landowners outside of the cities anyway, owned a fulling mill, and you could pay to have your wool fulled in it, walked in it, so to say. But if you didn't, then, and you were doing homespun, you could, into the bucket it goes. um, yeah, let's see. Valka in Swedish. Oh, interesting. Thomas, is Valka a name also? I can think of a lot of jobs in period worse than that. Yeah, I can. Yeah, mining in the Middle Ages. Holy God, how awful. Some of you may have know, because I've said this before. I've actually been to the extant medieval silver mines in Kutna Hora in the Czech Republic, and they take you on that tour, and they get you into the depths of this mine, and then they turn the lights off. And all they have is a tiny little tallow candle, like the kind of candles that medieval miners would have had, in a lantern. And so you get a sense for just how awful it was to work in this place. Yeah, mining, definitely. Mm. No, thank you. Tough choice. A walker or being the person who would collect and cure the fulling solution. Yeah. Well, I mean, in fairness, a lot of so taverns were usually innkeepers, and taverns were the ones who usually collected urine. They would just hang the urinals outside on their outer walls, not the inner walls, by the way. And not only would patrons use them, but people passing by would know that was a public restroom, that they could pee there instead of peeing on someone's house. And then the innkeeper's vertical integration at its finest, the innkeeper or the tavern keep would sell the urine to tanners, to the dyers, to the fullers, because it was a very in-demand product, fermented ammonia. So yeah, the innkeeper, the tavern keeper, got paid for the people to drink his wares, and then he got paid for them to pee the wares out again. I mean, brilliant, pure brilliance, entrepreneurship at its finest. Oh, I haven't waxed this yet. Talking about fermented urine. Oh, gong farmers. Oh, yes, gong farming. Oh, so those who don't know, don't know what gong farming is. In the Middle Ages, they used night soil for fertilizer, which night soil is human excrement and other waste products. And the gong farmers would actually go into the cesspits that people had in their homes, where, because not everyone, just contrary to popular belief, not everyone used chamber pots that they then just dumped in the streets. A lot of times they had a kind of outhouse kind of thing that had a cesspit. And the gong farmers, when the cesspit got too full, the middens, the gong farmer would go and excavate it. And they wouldn't just get rid of it, they would go sell that to the farmers as fertilizer. That's why a lot of medieval recipes call for vegetables to be boiled before you do anything else with them. They might not have understood why it worked, but they understood that it worked. So, boiling of vegetables could possibly be a step we might be able to skip in when we're recreating medieval recipes, because we no longer have that reason to do it. Hopefully, anyway. Let me see. I washed the wool only with water by fermenting and rinsing it. So it left the lanolin in the wool. It's slightly sticky with the grease, but clean smelling, and the hay bits come out well. Oh, yeah, the hay bits. Oh, God. When you get raw wool and it has all those chunks in it. Oh, yeah. Fun times. My kitties love it when I have raw wool, by the way. Raw, unprocessed stuff fresh from the sheep's farm. They just, they nest in that. Valcare. So Valcare was a profession, and now I see the connection. Ah, interesting. Gareth says, I recently decided to dye a wool gown after I cut out the pieces. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. How much? So let me see. How much did it shrink? 1 inch per 12 inches? Oof. Yeah. Yeah. Did I ever tell you all about the mistake I made in I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. In washing a hand sewn wool kirtle in a German washing machine on 90 degrees centigrade. And I don't even know. I mean, I was like 24. I don't know what I was thinking. I really, to this day, I'm like, what? I knew better. I knew better. Why did I do that? I don't know. I'm not even certain that I did it on purpose. I think it might have been an accident. Anyway, this beautiful, beautiful green wool kirtle, entirely hand sewn. And I do mean entirely. It came out of the washer and it's big enough for a 5-year-old child. Yeah, that was pretty sad, and like this thick. A 5-year-old child on the Mongolian steppes in the dead of winter. Perfect. Went from me to 5-year-old, survivable for a Mongolian winter comfortably. Yeah, that was real sad. So I definitely empathize with you, Gara, 100%. Copper alloy mines especially. Yeah, I bet the alloys are poisonous. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the things that the chemicals that they used in not just medieval and ancient and even Bronze Age mining. So where I lived in Heidelberg. I went to the University of Heidelberg for about a year, and so I lived there. And the water table down there is toxic. It is full of lead. Because the Celts who lived there in, like, the 5th century BC used lead in the water to make the gold precipitate out of the water because apparently the rivers ran with gold sediment, and if you add lead to it, the gold precipitates out. Well, that is an ecological disaster that is still plaguing that area to this day. So, yeah, this don't get too wrapped up in the idea that ancient man was lived more harmoniously with his environment. It's not necessarily true. Let's see. It was a bit loose and now it will be snug and I need to add a guard at the hem to extend the length. Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, this was not a bit snug. Like I couldn't even get my forearm through the arm's eye. Oh, yeah. I mean, gong farming, yeah, Nevis comments that gong farming was a reasonably paid profession. Absolutely. But unfortunately, it made you a pariah because, well, from what I've read from the primary sources, they always talk about malodorous gong farmers. So apparently, no matter how much they may have tried to bathe, they couldn't quite get that smell out necessarily. So, yeah. 90 degrees. Yeah. That's 90 degrees centigrade, everyone, in case you were wondering, not Fahrenheit. Yeah. Oh well. I mean, there's a reason working in the mines was in many historical cultures the equivalent of a death sentence, right? It was basically, we're condemning you to death, but we want to extract what value we can out of you before you die. So, yeah, definitely mine farming is certainly a worse job to me than gong farming. I mean, although God knows in a pre in a pre-antibiotic age, gong farming could certainly lead to a precipitous and sudden death from infection. if you had cuts on your hand or something like oof. Well, well. The lead into the water, same thing with mercury in the Western American gold rush. Yeah. Yeah. Might also be mercury as well now that you say that. I think it's lead and mercury. Yeah. Good times. Good times. The things humans will do for greed. It's like, can you eat gold? Well, okay, you can, but should will it replace food? No. Therefore, is it essential? Well, at that time, no, it was not essential. They had no electronics yet, so it did not form an essential part of any in any practical sense. But we humans like our shiny things. Well, poisonous copper mines could be an advantage. No rats survived. Falu copper mine was a refuge for the Swedish court in times of plague. But was it I mean, it was probably not an active copper mine, right? So, I mean, probably there was space for them to be in there without dying, suffocating slowly. I'm going to hope anyway. I mean, that is a good point. Copper mine, no rats, no plague. That might be why the plague didn't hit Sweden quite as badly as it did. Well, also, your population wasn't as dense, let's be honest, as the main continent of Europe. So I guess that's probably another reason that it didn't hit Sweden quite as bad. But yeah, escaping to copper mines. There's an interesting thought. No rats because it's poisonous. So better take our chances with the poisonous copper than with the deadly rats. So yeah, why not? Oh, the area around the copper mines. Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Mad as a hatter was not a euphemism. Yeah, yeah. But I don't think medieval hat making used mercury. Um, that was a later. I think that was a later development. But yeah, absolutely. The reason there's the Mad Hatter and the March Hare is because by the Victorian era, for certain, they were using mercury, and it was definitely mercury poisoning is neurodegenerative, shall we say? It's interesting how they rehabbed the character of the Mad Hatter in the recent cinematic reinterpretation of Alice in Wonderland. Oh, Kitties of the Palace. Maybe that's my condottiero. I guess I can hope, and not one of the cats who's figured out how to log into my laptop. We can hope anyway. Yeah, by certainly by the Regency era, they were using mercury. Yeah, I actually wanted to just delve into the process of medieval hat making, like proper millinery, felting and whatnot, and see. I haven't actually looked into it at all. I just know that mercury was not yet a going concern. But I wanted to look into that and possibly wander down that rabbit hole. Just what I need, another handcraft to pick up and figure out. Ambiguous, yep. Okay. So far there's nothing to prove that the kitties of the palace is not a kitty. Oh, my one cat this morning, Tommy, he's my little folded ear, still permanent forever kitten. He went crazy this morning. He was attacking me through the blankets like he was chasing a mouse under the blankets. It was unusual. He doesn't usually do that. With his claws, unfortunately. This is Navi. Yeah, sure. Takeda, is that medieval Europe or because there are different ways to make gold thread, and the one that I know definitely doesn't use mercury. Oh, interesting. I watched someone making of course maybe they don't want to use it in the modern reproduction process, I guess. I watched someone making silk thread. Sorry, gold thread. Um and they didn't use mercury, but that could have been on purpose, I guess, actually. Now that I think about it. Yeah. Taylor of Gloucester's cat. I has Wi-Fi. Very funny. Very funny. Nobby. I has Wi-Fi. Yeah, well, the kitties have passed out. You may have noticed that the violent rustling ceased. Takeda, do you also do, I guess you're a wool processor, a wool textilist in general, it sounds like. Do you also do felting? Or is it just something you've sort of casually explored but haven't delved into yourself? We actually have, oh, I don't have it. I guess my condo, I guess Navi has it. The the barretta alla capitanesca, as modern people call them, or the Victorians, I think, called them. The famous red condottiero's hat. And the one we have is definitely felted and not sewn like so many, I'll say, misinterpretations are made these days. Ah, metalworking knowledge. Got it. Yep, that makes sense. You know, a lot of, as yeah, that's actually a good point. A lot of these medieval handcrafts kind of feed on each other. You know, they're related in many ways. Hmm, the apparently I've decided I'm going to make it more narrow at this end. I don't know why, but there it is. Okay. My textile love is wearing them. Unfortunately, I have to make my own because of costs. Yeah, I love wearing it and making it, and I've always loved both aspects. I asked my grandmother when I was 9 to teach me how to make a dress. So I went and bought fabric. I was so proud of myself. Little 9-year-old me, with her allowance, went to the fabric store downtown back when there were things like that downtown. And I bought fabric. I bought this beautiful white satin that I'd been admiring in the window for weeks. And I bought the white satin, and my grandmom said, "Okay, I'll have time next week to teach you to make a dress." Well, I was not going to wait a week to learn to make a dress. A week to a 9-year-old is an eternity. And so I cut it up. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, zero, zilch, nada, no idea what I was doing. And I ended up cutting it up into some rectangles. And my grandma was so frustrated with me because basically there was nothing she could do for it at that point because of course she was modern dressmaker, not 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 medieval. We're going to take these rectangles now and make a geometric garment. Yeah, yeah, but that shows my eagerness to make dresses even at that age. Nevis says, I have a wacky new research hole to go down. I'm working on athletics and parkour stuff for a TTRPG system. And in my research, some professional traceur mentioned about a video game that dot dot dot. A lot of historical arc with a lot of historical architecture would break if someone parkoured on them. Oh yeah, tiles. Oh God, yes. I think about that all the time when I watch these people, like in Assassin's Creed, parkouring over these terracotta tiles, and I'm like, that would be a fast trip, 6 stories down to your death. Um, It's funny because in a lot of Eastern cinema and television programming, when people are parkouring over the roofs, they actually show that danger. They show tiles skittering off and people sliding and possibly falling, risking their necks literally. So yeah, that is an aspect that often gets ignored. Yeah, the not so affixed nature of some of these tiles and also how slippery they would be anyway. The game that is not to be named. So have you ever tried to dye a two-color linen jacquard to make it a pure one-color linen brocade? Did it work? I let me think about that. Two-colored linen jacquard. I have not. But even a so-called one-color jacquard, I mean, where it's technically the same color because of the difference of the weave in the pattern, it will never. Well, what do you mean by the same color? Could it be the same color but different shades? Or do you mean that that it looks like it's just one solid color and that the jacquard pattern kind of vanishes into it, I guess is a good question. Linen brocade. So linen, I mean, linen. The first step, honestly, I mean, you'd have to bleach it. You'd have to bleach the color out because I don't think you're there might be some pretty powerful chemical dyes that might be able to overcome that, but my instinct is that you're gonna have to bleach it first to get it to be all one color, whether it's white or gray or whatever it bleaches to, and then from there, try to dye it a single color, but would I do that? No, because as you know, the bleaching process is hideously caustic and destructive. Oh, 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 look, everybody. It's a Nobby. She just joined me. She thinks it's nap time. There's the little Nobby, just curled up right next to me. Nope, it's nap time. Oh, no, no criticism from me about your brocade being linen. It's just linen, linen is hard to dye. Um, it's not, it's resistant to taking, that's why I was laughing kind of helplessly because it's resistant to taking dye stuff. Um, so, you're starting at that disadvantage. So I would medieval dyes. That's why I said maybe a Rit dye might be able to overwrite it. It might be powerful enough, but probably maybe do a sample and see if you want to experiment with Rit dye. But you might, I I mean, really, I think the only way it's going to work is if you take it down, you strip it of the color that's there, and then start again with the dyeing. But again, linen, that's going to be such a destructive process that I wouldn't do that. Yeah. So yeah, if you're going to and yeah, the resistance varies by color. Linen takes saffron and certain yellows much better. Also, it takes blues better. Indigo is pretty decent on linen, which is why we actually have some blue linen from the middle that has survived from the 15th and 16th century. But I would say that you would honestly, I would experiment, right? This is what I do. This is what I would do. I would take a snippet and I would try with some of the Rit dye and see what happens. If that doesn't work, then you're going to have to strip it down to its base to a bleached color and then work your way up from there. But that might leave you with a very weakened fabric. Yeah, I found a reasonable pattern in blue and natural, and I was going to over dye it blue, so I hope it looks like a brocade. Yeah, so definitely, blue and natural is not as bad to overcome as say blue and red or something like that. So go ahead and give it a try. So what will probably end up happening, I think, is that the natural part, the lighter part, will just end up being a lighter blue than the blue part, so it will all be blue, but it won't all be the same shade of blue. But I would try with a swatch and see if you like the result. And if you like the result, then go forth, continue with the rest of it. If you don't like the result, then I would try another swatch with a dye removal, because I think Rit also has a dye removal um, product, I believe, and see how that works and what you have it what the swatch is like at the end of that process. And then if you like that, do it and then just, apply the whole dye. That would be kind of my recommendation. That would be how I would approach it. Oh, Nobby, you are being so adorable. Oh, you are so cute. So all of our kitties are rescue kitties. Our two tuxedos were abandoned, not abandoned. Their mother was hit by a car when they were babies, and so their whole litter was found on the top of a cafe. And the cafe owner noticed that the mommy didn't return after several days, and so the kittens were fostered out. So we ended up with two of them. And then little Nobby here, her mother stopped nursing her when she was probably 5 weeks old, just abandoned her and her sister, and she was on the point of dying when we took her in. and nursed her back to health. And now she's very ornery, as we see. No, this is this is not for you. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Kitty. Oh, when she's purring so loudly. She is so happy. Like most kitties, she has a fixation for strings. I could distract her if I took my undid the braid crown and just let her play with the braid. She would be totally happy with that. Oh, you are being so super adorable. Why? What is it you want from me? Oh my goodness. Let me see. Comments. Red on linen tends to be less vibrant and more orange. Check. You mentioned something about getting a copper pot for dyeing to me before. I have textile in hand now. Lotus silk, which I understand is mostly the same as dyeing mulberry worm silk. I I will confess total ignorance to mulberry silk, but or sorry, to lotus lotus silk, but if it is like mulberry worm silk, then yeah. The copper pot, the copper ions really help with the dyeing process, and they help create those vibrant colors, which is that is that I don't know if medieval people really I could probably look they probably say that in some of these dyeing manuals. They probably comment on copper pots. But, that was the pot of choice for medieval dyers, and when you use it, you get much more vibrant colors, and the copper also helps not only bring out the vibrant colors, but it actually helps mordant the dye stuff on. So you kind of get a 2 for 1 deal. Copper pots can be found on eBay. And also in secondhand flea market store or what I call flea market antique stores. So the antique stores that don't sell the really posh high end stuff, but are kind of like high end flea markets, if you all get what I'm saying. Um, so, nicer than a thrift shop, less nice than an antique store, but still has old crap. You can often find copper pots there. Sometimes if you're lucky, you can find them without holes having been drilled in them for turning them into planters. Yeah, if you're really lucky. Let's see. Linen needs to be a different mordant from what I've heard. Yes. Indigo will just as well. Yeah. So yeah, linen, you do need well, if you're natural dyeing, then you need a different mordant process. If you're using RIT dye, it kind of doesn't matter. The RIT the modern chemicals, you don't need to worry about the mordants and all that. They take care of all of that. Um it's all in the bottle. But yeah, if you're right, if you're dyeing linens, then you need a different or you need a different combination of mordants. The medieval dyeing manuals, actually, there's a 14th century Italian dyeing manual called I segreti per, or 15th century, I segreti per colori, which actually talks about dyeing linen in different colors. And it talks about the various it goes into good detail, in fact, like really good detail. Better detail than your average cooking recipe goes into, actually. And it talks about the different mordants and the multiple, like a kind of a mordant cocktail for dyeing linen. Because they actually did, just because they didn't necessarily make clothes out of linen in the Middle Ages, there was apparently a big industry for linen bedclothes and linen wall hangings. And Bologna was a center of this industry of linen bedclothes and linen wall hangings. So there were massive linen dyeing workshops in Bologna, and there are records from them, and they talk about the things they made, the orders they made, that they were fulfilling. And so they were, in fact, dyeing linen all manner of colors. It's not that it's not possible. It's just that one of the reasons they didn't do it for clothing is because clothing gets exposed to the sun, it gets used, it gets worn. And so those expensive dye stuffs fade much more quickly than, say, on bedclothes and wall hangings that stay inside a relatively dark space and definitely does not see a whole lot of sunshine. Especially not medieval Bologna. If any of you have been to Bologna and seen the massive tower houses there, that used to be the whole city. Not lots of daylight coming in those tiny windows. So, yeah. Fascinating facts with the Contessa. Let me see. Do, 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 do. Let me see. Charcoal for one. Makes sense for beds. Linen has antimicrobial properties. Yeah, exactly. White bread is binding. Cheese is also very binding if you don't, if you're not lactose intolerant. uh, just ask any soldier who's eaten the macaroni and cheese MRE what that does to his system while he's in the field. um, yeah, brief request for thumbs up if you're enjoying this fascinating and salubrious conversation. Oh goodness. Fiber to bulk things out. Yep. Oh God. In fact, is Kitties of the Palace still there? Nabi, are you still there? Would you like to comment on the staying power of an MRE? You're being very cuddly today, aren't you? Are you trying to show off for the camera? Is that what's going on? No, goodness, you are being super duper cuddles. Nabi goes through phases of being super kitten-like and cuddly, crazy, and bizarrely paranoid. So, yeah, this is unusual for her to actually cuddle up like this to me. Sorry, the camera's probably not picking up her very seismic purrs. She has a pretty good little rumble on her. Although nothing like our ginger cat, whose rumble can be picked up by seismographs in the neighborhood, probably. Mac and constipation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, MRA. It's funny the people who actually civilians who want MREs for some reason. Like, no, you don't. You don't want this action. This is not the experience you're looking for. Oh, goodness. Sound went out. Is sound back? Can anyone hear me? Or is sound still gone? Weirdly? Sound? Or can you hear me? Testing? Testing? Why did sound go out? Oh, okay, great. Good. I That's good. I hate it when I feel like I'm talking to myself and no one can hear me. I have dreams like that, by the way. Well, actually, they're nightmares. Yeah. No, bad kitty. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Pretty certain you have food. Saucy babies. Saucy, saucy babies. It's the preppers who want to buy expired MREs by the case. Oh, expired MREs, even better. Extra staying power. My cousin sent me a bunch of MRAs as a kid. That was an experience. Um, what kind of experience are we talking? Like, one you want to repeat or one you're glad you had but never want to repeat, or one you wish you hadn't had and definitely never want to repeat? Uh, Yay, finish the ties and eyelets on the gamison I need to have ready for someone tomorrow. Oh, nice. Is this Takeda, is this a typical sewing just in time for the event situation, of which I know nothing from personal experience whatsoever, of course. Experience. Glad I had, but would not repeat. Yeah, that seems like the right answer, I feel like. Oh, goodness. Yeah, I can't believe how cuddly Nobby is being. Let's see. Ah, there. I was waiting for that charming, metaphor or that charming analogy. Charming simile, sorry. Charming simile. Uh, sort of, I got bogged down with some other things that came up. It honestly was not procrastination this time. Takeda. I say that too every time. It wasn't procrastination. Fate. The universe kept me from getting to it. I'm teasing, by the way, totally. No judgment, really. None. Life really does get in the way. Let me see. Gara says, I'm appliquing a very large pelican on a half cape with a chain stitch and it is taking forever. Oh, but it's late May, so that's okay. Oh, well, Kara, why are you even working on it? It's early April. You've got 6 weeks before you need to start on it, for God's sake. Jeez. Freaking overachievers, man. But yeah, chain stitch is definitely not the fastest stitch. It's pretty. She ain't fast though. Whip stitch applique for the win. Oh, Nabi probably does miss her daddy. Nabi is definitely a daddy's boy. Nabi is this little tiger stripe here. Nabi means butterfly in Korean, by the way. It's a very common name for kitties. And she does kind of sometimes float like a butterfly when we're playing with her birdie toy. Anyway, she's definitely a daddy's girl. Let me see. Gara says, I'm going to Italy for 3 weeks and I'm not taking embroidery on the plane. But but it's a time-honored tradition to take embroidery on the plane. I do it all the time. How would you fly without doing embroidery on a plane? I don't understand your words. In fact, this was my embroidery project on this last flight. Yeah. It's one of my creative Contessa embroidery classes, and I just decided to take it with me and finish it. And then when I do another class, I'll just start another one. It's a mugunghwa, the rose of Sharon, the hibiscus that is the Korean national flower. Anyway, so yeah, I don't understand how anyone can fly without taking up embroidery. Do people do that? Just sit on a plane? Oh, no, yeah, finger crochet also a very plane friendly activity. Um, I often fly business class because I use points to get those kinds of seats, and you can do proper finger loop braiding in a business class seat. I take hydroxine and try to sleep. Oh, you're going to Europe. Right. I forget that not everyone has a 15-hour flight like I generally do. Right. Yeah, there's only my flights generally at least one leg of it is usually going to be about 14 hours because I'm often traveling between Korea and the US. So I forget that there are flights that aren't that long where it's practical to just sleep the whole time. Yeah. Yeah, 10 hours is a much yeah. Yeah. Does that actually work to help with your jet lag, Gara? I guess I'm so insomniac these days from general stress that it doesn't matter if I sleep on the plane or not. The monster of jet lag will still come for me and make my life hell for days. Like I was yeah, this last week has been a real interesting experience in polyphasic sleeping, not biphasic, polyphasic. Yeah. You're gonna go big or go home. That's what I always say. So, gentle reminder to all hand sewers to occasionally knot off your line of stitching so that if the threads wear out, the entire line of stitching doesn't come undone. It just comes undone between the two knots, two sets of locking knots that you've put in. Mhm, mhm. Mm. Getting more challenging now that we're at the end. Yep, very, very close. Tiny little bit left. Just this little bit. Oh, yeah. I yeah, I guess going 24 hours without sleep isn't the bestest, most fun thing. Yeah, everyone because I travel so much, people are always asking me, um, By the way, I have a Travels with the Creative Contessa channel if anyone wants to follow those travel adventures. Anyway, because I travel so much, people are always asking me for tips on jet lag. And the harsh reality is that truly, your body adjusts an hour a day. That's just where our circadian rhythms are, because that's kind of about as far as a human could really go normally before motorized transportation. Right? And so you just have to wait for your body to catch up. Now, there are ways to make it less bad, there are ways to make it more bad. Less bad is if you go into your trip well rested, like getting good sleep in the days before, at least 8 hours or whatever is your optimum, consistently. And then on the back end, when you land, if you can just stay awake for the whole day, whatever the whole day is, usually that will get you set up for more success in overcoming jet lag, but you're still going to experience jet lag. It's going to happen. Zend is getting a little finicky, I think, because it's a little warped. So it's less easy to just kind of fold and press as I go because it's resisting it. I think probably when I washed it. And yes, I put this in the washing machine, dumped a whole bunch of OxyClean in it, and ran it on delicate. So so anyone who tells you you can't machine wash silk, you can absolutely do that. And it looks pretty much the same as before. Hey, no, why? No, no, what are you doing? Leave it alone. Go back to sleep. You were sleeping so soundly. Yeah, no alcohol, plenty of hydration, stay awake to the new day rhythm. Yep. Yeah, good. Thank you for that point as well, Garrett. Yeah, don't drink alcohol on planes. It will actually make your jet lag worse. I hope my condottiero is listening. It will actually make your jet lag worse for certain, because it dehydrates you. And they've actually studies have been coming out about this lately that really underscore the importance of good hydration on a plane. So every time they come around and offer you drinks, take it. Even if you think you don't need it, you do, because planes are like 2% humidity. Um, so you definitely want to stay hydrated on them. Let me see. Did you talk about my new book? Which new book? My condottiero, because we you bought a whole bunch. Oh, the new books, all the collection? Yes. I mean, I talked about the amazing books of ours that you found. That if you mean that one, are you talking about a different one? Let me see. I've seen some things that show wax resist for negative space dye, but I haven't tried it myself. Yeah, I that's an interesting. I haven't tried any wax resist either. But I have read about them and okay, talking about resists now really brings something back. So in etching, in metal etching, um, wax resists are used also, of course. Acid etching. Wax resists are used to help create that pattern. So I'm not I'm not certain that I've heard about it for dyeing, a wax resist for dyeing. I mean, on the other hand, for silk screening, you use a resist, right? A resist line. So why not? It works for silk screening anyway. Might so maybe applying it to a space as long as the wax didn't come out during the dyeing process. But it definitely works for silk screening. Yeah, I'll be honest, Megan. It definitely sounds like something. Megan says maybe the thread resist technique is similar to the tie dye, but has a Japanese name. Yeah, it definitely strikes me visually as something more likely to be Japanese than European, considering um, th- the medieval textiles in Europe and what they look like and how they were made. Usually, if you're going to have if you're going to have something with a multicolored pattern, it's woven in. So all of it's either woven in and threads are dyed in advance, of, being racked up on the loom, or it's brocaded in, which is, kind of a weaving in, or it's stamped on. There's a stamping is a big thing in medieval textiles. But the kind of technique you're talking about, I have seen that in medieval Japanese textiles. I haven't seen it. I've no seen no evidence for it in medieval European ones. Mhm. Oof, this thread is starting to. So I don't know if you can see here in this camera because this camera isn't the best camera. This is my old phone. If you could see the screen on the secondary phone, it is cracked to hell and back because I dropped it and stepped on it while walking home one day. But my Condottiero has the good phone, the second good phone. So, but maybe you can see a little bit anyway how the the silk embroidery thread has basically deplied, so we're kind of at the end of its useful life at this point. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish off this line of stitching. Okay, I'm going to bury the needle as is my wont. Okay, there we go. Is it? Oh, goodness, 110. Okay, that would explain why my derriere is going numb. Okay, everyone, let me see. I've done wax resist for silk dyeing as well, but I can't remember how we removed the wax. And now to patch the failed seam on a pair of joined hosen. Oh, 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 patches on failed seams on joined hosen. Well, my condotiero's crotch right now on his joined hosen is basically just patches. Modern people trying to move modern ways in medieval hosen for the loss. Okay, well, um, let me see. Well, the object is supposed to be Chinese Japanese import, so Japanese technique is fine. Oh, cool. Great. Awesome. Circa 1540, first returns of Portuguese from there, right? Yeah. Yeah, the Portuguese made their move in Asia pretty quickly. From India onward then up to Japan. In fact, the first black samurais from the 16th century from Africa brought there by the Portuguese. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to call that good. So I'm going to last call for comments or questions. And while you make your comments or questions, I will tell you what awaits you. Right. So I'm currently working on my late medieval Irish men's fashion within the Pale, and there's some really good stuff in there, including discussion of sewing techniques for houppelans based on the Prague Royal Crypt houppelans that can definitely apply to the houppelans that were being worn in Ireland. Um, Also, I'm working on my video essay on how to use video essay presentation on how to use medieval art or not use medieval art for to inform your sartorial choices. And I'm probably going to be doing that one as a live stream presentation. So that should be fun, I hope, more interactive. And of course, I'll have a nice PowerPoint with all the images and whatnot. It'll be like an art history class, but art history with a focus on fashion, right? The best part of art history. No bias here. What else am I working on? I'm working on essays on pilgrims' badges and rings, medieval rings, and their uses and applications, some of which will surprise you. And of course, I've got these translations I'm working on of these extant garment reports, the archaeological reports. For my patrons and my channel members, I will be setting up probably a Zoom for next week or the week after for us to get together on live. I guess, well, at least we can see each other and talk to each other more directly. And if you want to show me your projects, what you're working on, get feedback, I'm happy to look at it through the, video and give you some suggestions. Or if you want me to demonstrate stitches or whatever, we'll be doing that in our channel member and patron thing. And I might even, if you want me to demonstrate dance steps, whatever, I'm there for you guys. Yeah, so if you guys have any requests for content, drop it in the comments after this publishes, and I will see if I can include that in our next sip and stitch and bitch and chat. And I'm going back to the weekly rhythm on this, so I hope to see you all next week. Thank you all so much for joining me. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up. I really appreciate everyone's chat. This has been a lovely morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time of day it is for you. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. So let me just check the comments. Yeah. So everyone, until next week, stay creative and stay safe in a world that seems to be getting increasingly crazy. Bye, everyone. Say bye, Nobby. Bye. Bye. Your little baby. You're a cutie. Yes, you are. Listen to your purrs. Listen to your purrs.